Uh, Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Dorset Police and Crime Panel meeting looking at Q1. Before we start the sort of formal element of this meeting, there's a couple of points I'd like to make, and I am going to read them because I want to make sure I get them right. So the first one would be, the panel would like to thank the PCC for signing a joint letter to the Home Secretary requesting a medal similar to the Elizabeth Cross that would ensure any emergency service worker who dies while carrying out their duties would be honoured and remembered appropriately with the dignity they duly deserve. So thank you for that, PCC. And secondly, the panel would also like to commend the Dorset police officers and staff who supported Operation London Bridge, which was the burial of our late Queen. Some 60 individuals on mutual aid, I understand, many of whom were deployed at very short notice. We'd also like to thank those officers and staff who remained here and continue to work to keep us safe. I'm told that this policing effort was possible due to planned leave being cancelled for the duration of the period of national mourning, and therefore the panel would like to place on record our warmest thanks for their ongoing commitment. So once again, Dave, if I could ask you to pass on to the Chief Constable the panel's thanks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, for those kind words, which I obviously echo around the London Bridge scenario. I think it's very indicative and also a small example of the quality of officers in Dorset Police that they acquitted themselves not only in London and other places around that, but also here during that very difficult time. And I was somewhat gratified that another PCC actually sent me a photo of Dorset Police doing good work in London, and to get that sort of accolade from one of my colleagues is very good and a testament to the quality of Dorset Police. So thank you for the kind words. I will pass those on to the Chief Constable.
Right, so moving on to the formal element of this meeting. Mark, do we have any apologies?
Thanks, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Barrow, and we also have 3 members that aren't with us live today but are joining us virtually, and that's Councillors Dove, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. I understand that there is one action from the last meeting based on the OPCC to provide an update on the National 101 calls contract.
Indeed. Chair, both myself and the Chief Constable seek updates on a regular basis. At this moment, we have had no update on this matter. What I can tell you is that it would not affect our situation 101 currently. So at this moment in time, we continue to ask for those updates. This is a national contract which we do not have the ability to influence.
Thanks very much. Moving on to item 2, minutes of the last meeting. I trust that everyone's read the minutes. Does anybody have any points they would like to raise on these minutes at all? No, thank you. Then moving on to item 3, declarations of interest. Mark?
Thanks, Chair. So I've just checked that panel members really are just invited to make any declarations that are necessary to ensure compliance with the Code of Conduct. So I'll just leave a moment for anyone to raise any if that is relevant.
I'm not sure whether it's relevant, Chair, but I thought I'll make the declaration anyway. I am a member of a local community speed watch group because it is mentioned in the papers.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, May. Noted. Moving swiftly on then, item 4, public participation. Any, Mark?
Thanks, Chair. No, we have no questions from the public today.
Thank you. And then, so we're moving now into sort of the meat of the meeting, which is the quarterly monitoring report, Q1, from the PCC. But before we do that, there's a couple of questions that have cropped up from the panel that I'd like to put to the PCC in order to get a view. It was reported in the local press that a decision by Queen Elizabeth School in Wimborne to bring sniffer dogs and carry out random bag searches to educate children about the dangers of drugs was praised by the PCC, who also reported was also reported as stating that this action should be implemented across the country. So the question really is, what action has the PCC taken in approaching schools in Dorset in order to fund the rollout of this programme across the county?
Thank you. For the benefit of those not familiar with the original news article, I'll first repeat the key parts of the quote I made to the Echo, which was that I am fully supportive of any school that decides to take action against drugs in county lines. QE School and other schools in Dorset have embarked on an educate, prevent and deter course of action, which I would like to see happen across the whole county and indeed across the whole country. I am determined to work alongside Dorset Police and partners to ensure that our young people not only have a safer school environment, but a safer community to live in. That's absolutely the case. And this is being progressed through my Fix the Future work and the activity carried out under my work as co-chair of the Addiction and Substance Misuse portfolio, which is and will continue to be detailed in Police and Crime Panel quarterly reports. Dorset Police's Safer Schools and Community team is well established, and I make sure that that team is resourced sufficiently to carry out their important work with teaching staff, parents and pupils. Indeed, my team are reviewing where we are with that at this moment. I'm going to have more to say on my office's Fix the Future work very soon. So, however, while I am supportive of schools taking proactive action, which is what I said in that quote, it's appropriate to their particular circumstances. I was not specifically suggesting that all schools should bring in sniffer dogs. And for the removal of any doubt, do not believe it is my place to direct how schools choose to manage their security, nor to fund the rollout of sniffer dogs and random bag searches. What it is for schools to look at what their situation is and to take the measures that they need to do in order to address what they perceive to be the drug threat and harm in their community. That's where I am with that.
Thanks very much, Dave. Succinct answer. Any points? No, thank you. Moving on to the next question. PCC action based on prevention of future deaths. There was the coroner's report on the death of Gaia Pope. What oversight has the PCC undertaken in order to ensure recommendations within the coroner's report are actioned?
Well, before I go into any further detail, Chair, I'd first like to reiterate that my thoughts remain with the family and friends of Gaia Pope, who was just 19 when she tragically died. They suffered a devastating loss, and I've met privately with members of Gaia's family to listen to and understand their concerns. I also listened intently to the inquest earlier this year, and I have carefully examined the recommendations in the coroner's Preventing Future Deaths report that were directed at Dorset Police alongside the force response. These recommendations cover areas such as improved training for officers, better clarity of policy and procedures, and enhanced quality of record keeping. I, as well as representatives from my office, have met the force to discuss what's changed since 2017, what other changes need to be made to improve the service delivered to missing people and their families. The force recognised that the immediate response to Gaia's family's requests for help and the first 48 hours of the missing person inquiry should have been managed better. And over the last 4 years, the force has undertaken a number of detailed reviews of its missing person policies, procedures and practices in order to improve. The force has delivered missing person training to key decision makers and ensures all staff involved in missing person reports receive initial missing person training. The force's missing persons, concern for welfare and deployment policies have been revised and updated. The crime recording system has been upgraded so pertinent information can be easily accessed, and a missing person coordinator has been recruited. Further, the force increased the number of daily tasking meetings from 2 to 3 to provide key leadership and command oversight, ensuring missing persons are a priority, and it is everyone's business to support missing investigations. The force also commissioned the Missing People charity to carry out an in-depth whole system approach review to provide further recommendations on how further improvements can be made. In November 2021, the force introduced 2 missing person teams to cover both local policing areas, one in Dorchester for Dorset County and one in Poole to cover Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. A third team will be in operation from September 2022 in Bournemouth. These teams are made up of police officers who are solely dedicated to placing scrutiny and structure around all missing person investigations, while carrying out effective prevention work alongside partner agencies to reduce future harm and repeat missing episodes. The team also proactively search for missing people, often finding them quickly and reducing the risks to those individuals. You may indeed have seen some of their output on various social media platforms when they're looking for somebody in order to try and address that. In short, I have already been assured that the way in which missing people cases are handled by Dorset Police has significantly changed since Gaia's death. Nevertheless, as Dorset's PCC, it is incumbent on me, as the representative of the people, to scrutinise and challenge the performance of the force and to hold the Chief Constable to account. In the months and years ahead, I will continue to carry out regular and detailed scrutiny and review to make sure that those lessons have been learned and they are embedded across the force, and our communities receive the level of service that they expect and deserve. Once again, I'd like to express my deepest sympathies for Gaia's family and friends at what must be an extremely difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave, for that detailed answer to that question. Does anybody from the panel have any follow-up points they'd like to raise at all? No, thank you. Then moving on to the HMIC FRS statement. They're very concerned about very few serious acquisitive crime offences result in justice for victims. Charge rates for robbery, burglary and vehicle theft are low and have dramatically decreased over recent years. The panel seeks confirmation that the PCC has sought assurance from the Chief Constable that Dorset Police are actioning the recommendations in this report and how he will hold the Chief Constable to account.
Thank you, Chair. Well, in response to the HMIC report, I have received a detailed response from Dorset Police to ensure that the recommendations are being addressed. I am, along with my office, involved in regular meetings on force performance relating to serious acquisitive crime and organisational learning about the same, and this is discussed and scrutinised, as I say, on a regular basis. In terms of actual recommendations and findings by the HMIC FRS, the report stated that nationally, the so-called screening of volume crimes can overlook the complexity and harm caused by serious acquisitive crime. This is very much recognised in Dorset, and consequently a dedicated force inspection team called Make the Difference carry out thematic victim service assessments, or VSAs. These are conducted by HMIC FRS as part of their assessments, and it is this process that the force has adopted to ultimately answer the question of how good is the force's service for victims of crime. The process of a VSA audit encompasses the victim journey from start to finish, enables a qualitative evaluation of the investigation, considers risk and safeguarding, whilst ultimately considering whether the outcome was appropriate for the victim and correct in line with crime recording requirements. Due to the thoroughness of this audit process, which has been applied to a range of areas, including volume crime, the force can formulate a clear understanding of how Dorset Police is performing in relation to investigation standards, demand management, and the complexity and harm caused by serious acquisitive crime. HMIC FRS also stated that forces often lack capacity to investigate serious acquisitive crime, and that insufficient supervision in policing can set the blueprint for poor standards. In Dorset, the tactical response to such crimes is managed through a crime allocation process for investigations, ensuring serious offences are managed by PIP Level 2 investigations. PIP 2 stands for Professionalising Investigation Programme Level 2 Qualification. Any PIP 2 investigation will be subject to a full Detective Constable investigation plan, followed by a DS and DI review. These are then subject to monthly workload reviews and 180-day reviews by DIs. At the early stages of these investigations, there would be daily reviews to ensure all evidence preserved and being managed diligently and proportionately. Further, the inspectorate raised the concern that inadequate digital forensic capability often hinders investigations in Dorset. Here now, the volume crime team and CID both follow the agreed protocol from Southwest Forensics. However, there is local agreement that if following a DI review, there is a need to step outside of this protocol, potentially because additional risks or harm have been identified, then this can be supported. And I welcome that, because this is about tailoring the response to the needs of the victim. Finally, the inspectorate made the points that tackling serious acquisitive crime needs a whole force approach, and that forces with a strong crime prevention culture are more adept at problem solving and achieve better results. I've already outlined an example of the type of work the Make the Difference team undertake, but it's important to emphasise that this team directly feeds not only the Force Performance Board, chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable and attended by my Chief Executive, but also the investigation standards, and the timeliness of investigations is overseen by the Investigation Standards Board, which is chaired by the Head of Crime, Chief Superintendent Neil Corrigan. It's very clear, therefore, that serious acquisitive crime is everyone's business, and that there is clear senior leadership in this area and a desire for improvement. The Force continually assessing trends and analysis through performance boards and other activity, such as the work to support the Force Management Statement, and will be, of course, be considering the possible impact on crime of inflation and wage pressures. I will continue to hold the Chief Constable to account for performance in this area and is subject to ongoing discussions on a regular basis. So I hope that gives you a pretty comprehensive view of where we are with that.
Thanks very much, Dave. Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Yes. Sherry? Sherry, please.
Thank you. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hillforts and Upper Tarrants Ward, Dorset Council. Thank you for that answer, Commissioner. Serious and acquisitive crime is one of the key themes in the work of the rural crime team, because acquisitive crime is very damaging for anybody who's a victim of it, but for some of the acquisitive crime in our rural communities is has very, very serious consequences for rural businesses. I'm thinking of the theft of rural equipment and so on, which is something that happens significantly. Can you assure us that there is really good close cross-working between the rural crime teams and the operations that you've just been outlining there in terms of acquisitive crime, so that they share the experience and they share the good outcomes? Thank you. I'd be interested to hear about that.
Thank you, Councillor Jesperson. Yes, I can assure you of that. And let me give you an example. You will be aware, and forgive me, I'm stealing my own thunder from later, but we have made a significant investment in the rural crime team. Before I came into office, there was 2 or 3 people. We now have a rural crime team of 17. That has meant that they are now able to take the fight to organised crime in our rural communities. It has meant they are able to do much more work, both prevention and actually tackling things like serious acquisitive crime. And very recently, they had an Operation Hardware, where they liberated over £500,000 worth of stuff. Generators, quad bikes, I think there were some tractors in there. And they found that, and I went to see them on the day where they were giving some of that back to the victims from whom it had been taken. That is now what we're able to do, but those operations only work because of close collaborations between the rural crime team, the neighbourhood policing teams, and obviously the whole structure within Dorset Police. So I hope that reassures you that that is a priority, and it doesn't matter whether it's urban or rural. This is a priority going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sherry. Thanks, Dave. Anybody got any more points?
MV independent member. Obviously, as I understand it, part of that report, I think, suggested that, particularly with burglary, that where crimes are screened, there'll be no officer attendance, and that sometimes will include scenes of crime as well, which obviously leaves the victims feeling sort of undervalued. And I see recently that the new Met Commissioner has committed to a resource attending every burglary in the Met Police. So they've got some other problems with how they deal with crime. But he's clearly said that one of the reasons that there's a low crime detection rate is because they're missing what used to be, I think, referred to as the golden hour, in terms of not sending attendance because it gets screened out because there's no immediate threat, risk or harm to the person. But if you've been the subject of burglary, it's pretty violating, and the consequences for the injured party are quite severe. So as the PCC, whilst it's an operational matter for the chief, have you a view on, for example, with burglary, every burglary being attended by an individual to start the investigation off?
Thank you very much indeed. Again, I think I'm leaping ahead because I was going to deal with this under the report. My view very clearly is that we need to categorise burglaries. We need to categorise the difference between somebody going into a shed and nicking a tool and somebody actually violating people's homes. The response the APCC have just done to the open letter from the Home Secretary regarding this, where burglary was mentioned, clearly makes that point. Ian, you make a clear call there about the effect on the victim. And I'm absolutely clear that there's nothing worse than somebody coming into your home, violating your home, possibly when you're upstairs and asleep. And this is something that I have sat down with the chief about, and we're working through plans in order to address it, in order to go in the direction of making certain that a resource, whether it be an officer or a PCSO or whatever is necessary, is actually at burglaries. Now, what that looks like will depend on what the burglary is. And I think it's that piece which needs to be worked through next. But absolutely, I'm committed to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks for Ian for your excellent question. So, moving on to the actual quarterly monitoring report, and thank you for taking those 3 questions up front, PCC. So, could I ask you to introduce your quarterly monitoring report, priority by priority? So once you've done priority 1, I'll then offer it up to the priority lead to see if they've got any points that they'd like to raise, and then the panel, and then we'll move on to priority 2. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So as people remember, quarter 1 report goes from April, May, June. The first priority is to cut crime and antisocial behaviour. So if I just take a couple of moments, I'll talk about the measures briefly. Firstly, from the point of view of total crime, we were slightly up. I don't think that will come as a surprise because I think nationally we were actually all slightly up. The gratifying thing from that is that I am aware that we have now gone from 10th to 7th from the point of view of our position in the safest ranking. We have to keep on driving for that, and there are elements within it which I am concerned about. Because we have to make certain we get right things about violence. That's where that is being driven from. Now, our antisocial behaviour incidents are down by 8%. And really interestingly, and we've just talked about it, when you look at the numbers, our non-dwelling burglary and dwelling burglary year to date is actually, firstly, for non-dwelling burglary, down 31%, and for dwelling burglary, down 19%. Now, I make that point because I noticed in the paper today it actually says our burglary's up. So I think I'd just like to clarify that and get that sorted. We absolutely have to make certain that we get all of this right. And what you're seeing as Ian alluded to just a moment ago, is you are seeing very clearly a movement in Dorset from the areas that were looked at before to now areas which matter to the people. So antisocial behaviour, burglary, drugs, violence, rural crime, those areas are now being moved on very, very comprehensively. So what has actually happened in that area, in this priority during that quarter? Well, first of all, I inputted to a ministerial roundtable with other PCCs, with the policing minister, to talk about antisocial behaviour and the beating crime plan. We also relaunched something called the Operation Relentless Community Fund. The panel may remember that we did this last year. We relaunched it this year, and that fund supports community groups and charities with initiatives aimed at tackling ASB. And I'm going to mention that we had, I think it was 23 bids for that money, and we have been able to support 11 of those going forward. So in total now, across those two phases, we've done over 20 places across Dorset which would have received money in order to address ASB on a very local level. Now, burglary, we just touched on that. That is red in this report, and quite rightly it is red because it is next from our perspective for us to work hard in order to address. Where we are currently is I have had a number of conversations with the Chief Constable to look at how we address this going forward. I just alluded to one or two of those. I've also supplemented that with further conversations, for example, with the Assistant Chief Constable, who I spoke to yesterday, who is putting together a piece of work around this. I know that this will be addressed going forward, and I look forward to coming back to the panel and giving a progress report on what we've done about burglary at a future date. Regarding fraud and cybercrime, this is one of those hidden harms. This is one of those things which people don't talk about because they're slightly embarrassed if they get caught by it. And this is something that nevertheless we have to absolutely try and address and take seriously. I'm very pleased that the Dorset Economic Crime Team have actually got a fraud protect officer post now, which will be looking at the prevention of fraud in our county. And this will build on the regional resource which was there before. So now we've got a local resource. The other area in here, which was also red, which I will talk about probably in more detail later, is supporting young people. Now, I've got a three-strand approach, which is what I call the Fix the Future initiative. And within that, there is going to be a community grant scheme. There is going to be work to ensure we capture the youth voice. And there's going to be a menu of interventions for young people in the criminal justice system in order to try and address early intervention before we get across other things. And then there's a little piece on road safety, but to be honest, I'm going to be very quick on this because we've actually got a paper on it. I wrote to the Transport Minister about urging him to increase the fines for motoring offences. We have a difference between mobile phone and other motoring offences. I think if we all brought them into line, it would make sense, and I'm in common with a lot of other PCCs who feel the same thing. At the moment, that's a work in progress, is my understanding. Obviously, things have changed since that Transport Minister, and we'll have to see where we go next. I do welcome the introduction of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, which include increasing the maximum penalty for causing death by dangerous driving. And that, I think, also was a very, very important inclusion. So that's kind of a brief summary of Priority 1, and I'm very pleased to take questions.
May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for that report. In fact, you've actually answered quite a few of the questions that I had actually listed. The first one was obviously the two items, the burglary and the support young people, which are still RAG rated red, which is a concern, particularly given the points that Ian had actually raised about burglary and the impact it has on the victim. So I'll actually look forward to hearing more about what the plans are to actually tackle this and to actually improve the RAG rating on this, given that this is actually Q1, so Q2 would be the summer months. Just it'd be interesting to see what the values are, the numbers for Q2, which is summer, where a lot of domestic burglary tends to happen. And then the other thing I wanted to ask was obviously supporting young people. I completely agree with you. It is very, very important because this then links into a further priority you have, which is fighting high harm, because they are kind of linked. I'd like to hear a bit more about, you've got there the menu of interventions. What interventions were you specifically thinking of here? And also whether there was consideration about diversionary activities for the youth, because that is something that can, in some instances, actually help to reduce or to convert, perhaps that's not the right word, but to bring those who are on the cusp actually back so that they then do not go on to commit criminal offences. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I think there's a couple of things that I'm going to say before I get into the detail. First thing is, I think we need to remember that this plan, this police and crime plan, was put together for 7 years. And the reason I did that was because there are some things which will take time to fix. One of the things is very much around our young people and fixing the future and changing that area. And the other one is addiction. Both of those are what I see as being long-term from the point of view of addressing them to my satisfaction, if that makes sense. You made a very good point about seasonality. In the summer, we have significant numbers coming from outside of Dorset here, and there will be a proportion of those who decide that they are going to come here for tourist crime, let's put it that way. We'll see where we are with those figures and what happens at the next quarter. But this performance report relates to Q1. And you'll have seen that there's just 2 of the 28 priority areas were graded red for Q1, burglary and supporting young people. So let me cover the burglary first. The report highlights that the volumes of both burglary dwelling and burglary non-dwelling are down by 20% and 31% respectively, representing good progress. The performance against burglary, therefore, is good. However, I am not complacent, and I want to see more done. The RAG ratings refer to the delivery of the specific commitments in my plan, and this refers to 4 commitments. Firstly, to reduce the number of residential and business burglaries in Dorset. I've just mentioned the residential statistics and to confirm the volume of burglaries from business and communities is down 5%, some 13 offences in Q1. Secondly, to expand the Bobby Van scheme. As members will know, we currently have 2 vans, and it remains my strategic objective to increase this number over the term of my police and crime plan. To manage expectations, this will be a very hard-won objective and is not something I expect to see in place in the short term. Thirdly, I have tasked the Chief Constable with introducing or enhancing a dedicated burglary squad to pursue frequent offenders. Ian and I have had a number of conversations about this. He remains as determined as I to make further inroads into tackling burglary, but members may know that policing as a whole is experiencing a national shortage of detectives. And until such time as more uplift officers have undertaken their initial training and stint within the local policing command and are free to specialise in investigation or other roles, there will be limited opportunities for this. Nevertheless, it is our intent that this will happen. Finally, to continue to work with local authorities and bids to target hardened priority areas against burglary. Members will know that despite the significant challenges small counties like Dorset has in attracting national funding, we've made progress here and to date, and have undertaken a programme to improve CCTV and ANPR coverage in both BCP and Dorset. including most recently a successful bid of just shy of £250,000 for Weymouth. Now look, burglary is the thing that's next on the big task list as far as I'm concerned. We've made progress on ASB, we've made progress in the right direction with drugs. We need to now make progress with this. It's going in the right direction from the figures, but nevertheless, we have to make it as difficult as possible for burglars to do their job here. And we also have to make it as easy for people as possible to prevent them doing that. And there is work going on in the prevention space as well. So I hope that provides some assurance that although it's red at the moment, there's quite a lot of thinking going on about it and a lot of work going forward, which we intend to bring in place.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that answer. And I look forward to hearing more about the plans that are currently under discussion, and also to see what the figures are in the next quarter. There is a level of assurance there, but I also support the Commissioner, your view that we mustn't remain complacent on this, because the impact to the victims can, in some instances, be absolutely devastating. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And to be fair... Sorry, to be fair, I only answered half the question. We also needed to talk about young people. So on supporting the young people, at the time period for which this report covers, which was Q1, we had yet to fully determine our programme of work. During Q1, my team were undertaking research ahead of scoping options with the force and our partners and formulating a number of recommendations for my consideration. These were presented to me this month, and I'll be happy to speak more about these in future meetings. For a moment, though, there are 4 identified strands on the Fix the Future work thus far. A Fix the Future grant, which will launch next month and support initiatives and projects that engage with young people to direct them away from criminal behaviours and provide interventions for young people in the justice system. So exactly the diversion that you were talking about. To further expand our menu of options of commissioned intervention and diversionary activity for young people to be referred to who have committed offences or are exhibiting criminal behaviours. That's the second piece of work, to look through and see what menu of options we can deliver. I want, going forward, everything that we do from the point of view of anything to do with young people to actually have a youth voice there within that. So we need to build that local youth voice, and that's well underway through the expansion of the police cadet scheme. We've got over 100 cadets now, 4 schemes, moving to 8 over the next year. So as you can see, we are rapidly increasing that. But the youth voice and how we get it will be formalised through a mechanism yet to be determined, but in alignment with the Force's child-centred policing and youth engagement approaches. What I am keen on is that we make certain that we have a real spread of voice. I've had offers from young people to come and talk. I want to make certain that the young people we have are spread across demographics, income capability. I want to make certain that Dorset is represented in this way, as I like to make certain Dorset is represented in every other way. So that's what we're working through at the moment. And the fourth one is very much to continue to identify and work with our statutory and non-statutory partners to apply for funding to support youth services and youth intervention and diversionary work, such as the current Youth Investment Fund. And we're linking up with both councils on this because this is a partnership approach. We need to make certain that we're working together on it. And I would ask, I know that they do it, but I'd ask for the ongoing support from both councils in order to get there with this aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for that response to my second question. I'm very interested to hear about the future grant, and that when it's launched, that perhaps members of this panel are notified so that we can then advertise it on your behalf, because I'm sure there will be communities all over Dorset that would benefit and be interested in applying for something that could actually then benefit them and benefit, more importantly, the young people. And on the voice of the youth voice, and this is more a comment from myself, is that I can only speak on behalf of BCP Council, but I sit on the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, a bit of a mouthful there, and our members of Youth Parliament attend regularly, and perhaps they could be another source for youth voice because they are very, very active. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, May. I'm going to move on to Mark and then Ian. Mark.
Yeah, Mark Howell, Councillor for Pooltown BCP Council. I'm pleased to hear about the youth voice. I'd just like to ask a couple of questions relating to that area. Firstly, in the paper it says that 95% of people feel safe in Dorset. You know, what is the figure for people under 18, and do we have a significant enough of a sample for that to be significant and reliable, whatever that figure is? And in terms of the purpose of the voice, is the purpose essentially to help the police understand what young people are scared about and what kind of interventions that they perceive as being necessary to improve their safety? Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can pick up on some of those points there. Firstly, Councillor Haynes, your point about advertising. Yes, absolutely. We'll make certain that, along with a lot of other people, that this panel gets the information so they can spread it to the community. Your point about the Youth Parliament is well made. They are already on our radar. The issue I have is I want to make certain that we have this, as I said, across a wide demographic, both in terms of, well, everything really. Regarding the survey, that's a very technical question. Does anybody have the answer to that? Adam, please.
Morning, Adam Harrod, Director of Operations for the PCC. I give a kind of answer to that one in terms of the safety for it, in as much as we've recently done a summer survey for the Commissioner, where we asked people to say how safe they felt Dorset was. And the majority of people say it's one of the safest counties in England and Wales. Younger people more or less answered the same as older people for that. So in that respect, there didn't appear to be a massive difference. You tend to find it's about where people live in Dorset rather than their age or other things. On the basis of the surveys I've seen, you're right to say that fewer younger people tend to complete surveys than older people. However, the national surveys, and that's where that particular thing comes from, are worked out to be representative of communities as best as they can. So it should report that they're in Dorset, people, yes, young or old, typically feel safe.
Does that answer your question, Mark?
Well, that's because there was a second part to your question, Councillor Howe. I was just going to address it. The second part was about the purpose of the youth voice. I would expect Dorset Police to be talking to young people about those factors, about what makes them feel safe and all the rest of it. I would expect them to be doing that, and I'll be holding them to account for doing that. This will serve two purposes, in my view. It will make certain I have a counterbalance, and I hear that also from the young people. But the second purpose is very clearly, if we are bringing forward, as we go forward, as we develop things, I want to make certain that we develop it in a way which hits the customer, that they, as young people, find useful. And that is the second part of why I want a youth voice, and collected from as wide a possible demographic as we can do it. So I hope that helps answer the second question.
Thank you.
Ian?
It's most probably a bit of tidying up, but back to burglary again. Sorry about this, got a dog with a bone. Obviously, we've had a commitment from the PCC to come back to here, but I think we need to sort of clarify that in terms of it would be pointless doing it I would suggest Q2 because it's still early. But say in Q3, we have an update about burglary, which would focus on the continuing way that the PCC holds the Chief Constable to account on this, what resources he additionally will be allocating, whether that be finance or commissioning, and then obviously a test of how it's going with what the reduction is in particularly residential burglary, but also how he's holding the Chief Constable to account and assisting in how he increases the detection rates for burglary. And I would suggest that unless the PCC is going to say something different in terms of time, that would sit at Q3.
Thanks, Ian. Do you see that as a, yeah, I'll come to that in a minute. I don't see that as an actual paper, more as a Q3 monitoring report. Monitoring report. Do you see it that way, or do you see an actual paper?
I think given the four things I've just described there, it most probably would be a paper, but a lot of it, the PCC, it would be normally within this. But I think because of what it is and what we're saying is the impact on victims as well, given the poor detection rate nationally, and also reflect that, it's most probably a little bit more than that, but it would be within the normal quarter. But I think it must probably be, looking at Simon now, because it would be groaning, it'll most probably be a more fuller report, I think, and I think Q3 is the right time to do it.
Yeah, definitely endorse Q3, whether it's a paper or a quarterly monitoring report. We can talk in the margins on that. I'm interested in your view, Dave.
So I'm very comfortable. I said we'd bring back information on that. So just for my clarification, Q3 is not the next meeting, it's the meeting after it. So we're talking about February time. I think realistically, if it was the one after, I think that would actually be better. That will allow it to be embedded. That will allow us to be able to say, this is what we've done, rather than this is what we're going to do. And the reason I say that is because we've also got resources that we've got to manage. We've also got to look at where we are year end. We've got all the financial stuff which we need to wrangle, and that will have implications to what we can and can't do. And I'd rather have a fuller answer than a half-baked one.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with February is obviously that's the finance one in terms of council tax. So logically, as I say, 2 is too early. Going across the year would be too late. So it's got to be 3 or 4, isn't it? And that's so if it's 4, it's 4.
Any other points on priority 1? Okay, thank you. Moving on to priority 2 then, please, Dave.
So this is the priority which I colloquially refer to as the oil tanker. This is the one which needs to move. It will be slow to move, but we're making progress. This is about connectivity. This is about engagement. This is about what I call customer service. So we have increased the number of full-time equivalent police officers. We're now standing at 1330.4, if we can use that horrible way of doing it. I think we'll just keep it at 1330 from my perspective. We know that we have issues with 101 and our answer time. We had that issue in Q1. 999 calls, we were there or thereabouts at 81%. If I can just digress a little bit in order to talk about why that is occurring. We have had immense demand into the control room. We also have, as people remember, because I've spoken about this before, we have 60 to 70% of the demand is for what could be colloquially termed non-policey type stuff. We also have some which are, quite frankly, not police matters at all. So when somebody dials 999 and says my McDonald's delivery hasn't happened, or that their girlfriend has dumped them, or that they can't get in their house, they need a locksmith. I'm sorry, those are the ones which if we could remove from the system, it would make the life very much better. There is a lot of investment going into this area, and I will talk about that much more at a later date, no doubt. The main things that have happened with Uplift and visibility. So I've met with the chief officers, and very specifically, this was to talk about what are we doing about access to officers, particularly in our rural areas. And those plans were progressed through the Chief Constable's Contact Demand and Engagement Management Programme. So CDEM, as it's colloquially called, is something which there is a lot of focus on. This is the Chief's response to the 3 hours with me last November, where we talked about how are we going to sort reporting, how are we going to support visibility on the ground, how are we going to support connectivity with the people. And that is beginning to move. I have seen engagement figures which are increasing. But of course, it needs to be consistent. And when I talk about that, I will always be talking to an area where for them it hasn't happened yet. And that's the piece we've got to get right. We've got to get consistent engagement correct. So we've also got a process of looking at what are we going to do in those areas which need a physical front desk. And one of those is we've got a new rural crime van, which will be able to go to more remote areas. And we actually launched that at Kingston Morwood a little while ago. It has to be about the people and the police talking to the people. Why is that? Because it provides reassurance, but critically it also provides intelligence, so the police can do what they need to do. Now, we've got new community engagement contracts issued across all the neighbourhood policing areas. Those are available on the Force website. So what these websites should now have, and if they haven't, let me know, but what they should have very clearly is who the officers are in that area. They should have the neighbourhood engagement contracts, which is their commitment with their local people, their priorities, if you will. And antisocial behaviour, as I've stated before, is one of the ones which is going to be in there. But it also should have where they can be met with. So it should talk about Facebook meetings, public meetings, more visible policing in the community. Now, as I've said, this is a work in progress, but my desire is that that's in place and that is improving. And I know that when people contact me in the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and say, look, it's not quite right here, I will then send that across to the force and say, you know, we need to get this right in this space. Regarding customer service, what I'm very clear I wanted to understand was what people thought about 101 and 999 services. And I promoted a national survey which ran from May to the end of June. So that national survey will report, it will feed in. I don't think it's going, if I'm honest, I don't think it's going to tell me any different to what people tell me on the ground when I talk to them, which is the improvements that we need to make. But nevertheless, that will be additional ammunition in order to drive for resources in order to address it. And the last one is I chaired the Use of Police Powers Scrutiny Board, which reviews and considers data concerning the Force Control Centre performance alongside force complaints information. So this is where the independent body with me will feed back to the force what we think of the numbers, what we think of what's going on and how improvements can be made. This included a dip sample of police complaints files undertaken by the OPCC, and good practice was observed throughout that dip sample. So I think that's giving you a bit of an overview. This is very much a work in progress. That's why it's yellow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. Ian, you're the lead.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, but they're all different subjects. The first one is obviously under making policing more visible and connected, you've committed funding, i.e. the public's money, to improving buildings and to in turn improve the delivery by more efficient and effective use of buildings and equipment, and also visibility. But now, given the current financial situation with costs like power, etc., going up, the police is not going to be immune from that. So will some of your plans be affected by the fact that the police are going to have to spend more money in certain areas that they weren't expecting to, i.e. power, lighting, etc.? But will that have an impact on those plans, some of which are quite long-term, i.e. the headquarters building? That's the first question.
So we actually do address that as part of the questions that we've got later on the finances, but I'll get Julie just to give you a comment on it right now.
So we are obviously very much aware of risks and issues relating to estates costs, but that is something we're managing closely. We review it at our capital strategy group, but we also consider that at Resource Control Board. We are looking at our different priorities, but at the minute we're confident that we are within our budgeted plans from what we've prepared so far. Certainly this year, energy, etc., is on track. But it's also important to make sure that we invest in those energy efficiency, technology, etc., to reduce costs going forward. So that is also something we're not wanting to stop that, because actually it saves money in the long run.
Obviously, the reason I'm asking it is that you've committed to some quite big expenditure, which, you know, in reality, when there's a push on the budget, some of those will slip because, you know, that's just the way it is. Because where else can you find the money? And I think it's having that commitment that your use of public funds is going to meet its deadlines that you've obviously agreed with the Chief Constable around. Station improvements, better working conditions, and some large projects like the headquarter build, which is much needed, I think, to improve delivery, because it's an inefficient lump of concrete, effectively.
Thank you, and thank you for the endorsement of the inefficient lump of concrete. Look, I'm very, very clear that we have mechanisms in place through which Julie's just alluded to, for example, such as the Resource Control Board, that we are looking at these budgets on a regular basis. At this moment in time, we are confident that we are still able to deliver what we need to deliver, and the aspiration remains exactly the same as it was. So there isn't a red flag being waved at me around this at this moment. Obviously, we're going to keep that under advisement, but we are moving ahead with the plans, both for the office, the headquarters, but actually, more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, the other plans around the other areas of Dorset, and also the way to bring connectivity back to the general public.
Thank you. So number two, again, sounding like a dog with a bone, back to 101. I don't often say this over the last 10 years, but 101, I still don't get a warm, loving feeling about it, because the problem with 101 was when it was introduced, it was done in 43 different ways. And the idea of the national contract was primarily to make sure it's done in one way, but also would remove, using your words earlier, the non-policing type stuff. Hence, it's so crucial that it's done. And if it keeps on being put on the back burner by central government, it means we're going to end up doing it 43 different ways, which is going to be more expensive for Dorset residents. So hence, my lack of a warm feeling is that 101 contract appears to be just dropping into the ether. So what is it that the APCC are going to do about that on behalf of the policing service?
So we have a general meeting coming up shortly, and it's very much on the agenda. More importantly, we need to coordinate with the NPCC, the National Police Chiefs Council, and we know it's also on their agenda. There is a summit between us in November. So there's a number of opportunities we have in order to keep pushing on this, which we will do, as well as our individual soft power as PCCs when we meet with the policing minister, either individually or as a group, which we do on a regular basis. So it's on the radar, and we'll keep pushing. I ain't got a magic wand, Ian, but I'm as intent on getting this sorted as you are, because that's the important point. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I think it's an update that we get in the normal next quarter, because that'll be after the November meeting, so it's not an action. I think it just rolls over, and I just think we'll be, if it goes the way of, say, Airways, we'll still be talking about a national contract in 2024 at the rate we're going. I hope I'm wrong. So the third one for me is about body-worn video. In the use of police powers and scrutiny, does the panel look at body-worn videos in terms of like complaints with random sampling, and or use it to support how they're looking at, say, random complaints and things like that? That's it. Just a straightforward one, that one.
Absolutely, is the answer. Firstly, for members' understanding and assurance, I've got quite a piece on this, so let me go through it in detail. Firstly, for members' understanding and assurance, Dorset Police has been using body-worn video since 2016. As an alliance unit, workers continue to ensure both forces are at the leading edge of this technology. So it is some technology we're at the leading edge of. A raft of policies and process exist to govern the use of BWV within policing, nationally including the 2014 College Policing Guidance and Authorised Professional Practice, and the 2013 Information Commissioner's Code of Practice for the use of CCTV systems in public places. Locally, a corporate policy governing the use of BWV exists and is annually refreshed, the last time being in May of this year. This is supported by several operational procedures covering both the generic use of the devices and the specific use within public order, custody, firearms, and other operational environments. All uniformed operational encounters where an officer exercises a power must be recorded on BWV, unless there are specific and clear reasons which are supported in policy, such as the device being damaged or lost, in which case a replacement should be sought as soon as possible. When activated, unless it's impractical to do so by reason of the situation, behaviour or condition of those present, the officer should make a verbal announcement in plain language. You are being video and audio recorded. That's the formal words, which would be ideal. Compliance rates are measured, and these are variable dependent on the police activity. They are very good for areas such as stop and search, and 95% compliant in Q1, for example. But for other areas such as crime investigation, this rate is much lower. However, these rates are subject to performance scrutiny and are a continual area of focus in order to improve compliance. So now on to the use of police and powers scrutiny panel itself. The scrutiny of BWV is fundamental in panels like this, and recent national recommendations have stated that it should be available within these panels to increase the legitimacy and accountability of police actions. Each meeting I go to, they independently have selected DIP samples. So we have a list of all the body-worn videos in a certain category, such as stop and search. And we will say, as the independent body, which ones we want to see. And we regularly look at 6 cases, 3 stop and search cases, 3 use of force cases, and these are based on thematic areas which we, the panel would pre-select, such as young people, ethnicity, repeat offenders, use of weapons, drug stops, etc. It's the role of the panel members to independently scrutinise the body-worn video of these cases, which will involve the use of powers of Dorset Police. The BWV is presented along with a narrative from the force, and a force leads for stop and search and use of force are on hand to answer any queries that we may have. In addition, my Chief Executive and Director of Operations are present and can provide additional scrutiny alongside myself. The panel's feedback on individual cases is framed constructively, but does include findings which promote best practice or identify training needs for consideration by the force or other agencies involved. So basically what we will do is make recommendations from what we've seen and what needs to change, needs to be improved, etc. We're asked to score each case along the following matrix. The panel supports the action taken by police as reasonable and proportionate. The panel supports the action taken by police, but with some follow-up comments or recommendations as feedback, or the panel does not support the action taken. Any key themes, issues, or concerns are then taken by the force's own internal board structure for further consideration and action, and then the loop is closed, coming back to the UPPS panel in due course with them telling us what's been done. And finally, for transparency, I make certain that the summary minutes of the panel are published on the OPCC website. So yes, body-worn video is integral to our ability in order to scrutinise, and I'm absolutely supportive of it, and we're at the cutting edge. Thank you.
And obviously that last bit I think is important for the public in that any individual can access those minutes through the website. So I'd sort of push that, really. If people want to know about it, go on the PCC website. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ian. Just following up on that, that was that question was primarily driven in the Chair's brief by research in Scotland, which identified that police officers were using, through the body-worn video, police officers were using mobile phones when driving, for example. So you've identified specific use of body-worn video, dip stamping. I think it was the issue of body-worn video actually identifying, shall we say, inappropriate use of, say, mobile phones when driving. That's really where that came from. So you've identified when body-worn video is authorised being used. It's when it's not authorised, it's been left on, for instance, that is identifying, shall we say, as I said, maybe the wrong image that's being drafted. Do you have any plans to look at any of that? Because you're dip sampling what you're given, in effect.
So I'm not really going to comment on Police Scotland and their practices, but I would expect Dorset Police, if that occurred, for that to be picked up through their line management processes. And it's an interesting comment. It's not one I've heard before. I will ask a question about that and how that works. Okay,
I'll send you the report that was done by police. It was done by a university up in Scotland. Thanks. So moving on to priority 3 then.
Mike, I think my understanding is that was a report, but also that was something that came out of, would come out of something like a complaint made about one thing, and then when the body-worn cameras reviewed, that came up. So there is a bit of a, I think it'd be difficult for the PCC to sort of make comment on that because of how that information came about. That most probably isn't very clear what I've just said there, but it isn't. It would be impractical, as I understand it, to expect reviews of body-worn video to be done like that because of the volume there is, and you would be doing, there'd be excessive work for a limited return. But that example came out of a complaint about something else, I think, and then it was discovered. So it's different. I don't know whether that helps or not.
So actually, yeah, I wasn't thinking about initiating another panel to look at that and going through what should I call miscellaneous body-worn video. I don't think that's the approach at all. But what I am interested to understand is I'd like to see that report because I'd like to ask the question about if that happened here, what would be the mechanism in order that that was addressed with the individual. I think that's a fair shout from my point of view.
Which is it being efficient and effective, which I think is right.
Thanks, Ian. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask on priority 2? Go on, Shu.
Slightly more lightweight question than that, a more general question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So we're looking here generally at work in progress. I appreciate that, and there is progress to be seen here, and this is good. And I would just say that I think this whole area of know your local police would be a very good theme for the next meeting when you come to visit our local parishes in North Dorset, because that's very much at the level at which we need to make these connections, isn't it? So I'll be in touch on that. My question is about the victim satisfaction indicators, which at 66% are quite low, Amber. So what do you have a target figure for what that needs to be? What are we aiming for? What would green look like?
That's a very good question. My thoughts is I'd like to see it 75%, 80. If we're starting off from a base of 61.8, 67.6, I'd like to see it go in that direction. I wouldn't say that within the context of certainly the first term, it's going to get anywhere near 100%. It is a huge piece of work which needs to happen, because it is very much part of a cultural change which is occurring and thinking much more about victims than we ever have done before. So I'd like to see it in that sort of zone, then I'd be feeling a bit more comfortable.
Thank you. So the question then for all of us then is, how do we make sure that we remember that the figure we're aiming for is 75, 80? The thing with this RAG system is when it starts to move in the right direction, it goes green. So it will start to go green when it gets to 69%, and then we will then stop paying attention to it. So we just need to be aware of the fact that even 69%, we might consider that quite low, even though it's gone green because it's moving. And what this system doesn't record is what we were aiming for, what the target figure was, and what a satisfactory outcome looks like. It's not really a question, it's more just a general point for us all to be aware of. Thank you.
May, did you have a question?
Yes, it's sort of a question, sort of a comment. Going back to 101, 16 and a half minutes, that's actually, I know it's showing red, but I have been on the phone for well over half an hour for 101 and then given up on several occasions. But what I was actually going to say was there are other ways of actually reporting. And I had a particular award case where someone had taken videos of speeding cars up and down their road and said that he'd had no response from the police trying to upload it. So I actually pointed him onto the webpage where he could actually upload it, because I think for security reasons, the video can only be uploaded in a certain way so that the police can therefore actually access it. So my question is, you have 101, but there are also other ways of reporting digitally. I know not everyone is digitally enabled, but for those that are, what kind of awareness is being raised that actually there's more than one way of reporting as opposed to phoning 101? And then it kind of links back to the point that Sherry had actually raised about victim satisfaction. And I'm looking particularly as the kept informed, because that's the other regular gripe I get from people, which is that, yeah, we report it, we get a generic, yes, thank you for your email, and then we never hear anything. That's probably not news to you that people say that. Thank you.
So neither of those are any surprise. We've talked about this, I think, in the last panel before that. There are a number of factors here. One factor is the demand, which I talked about earlier, and some of the things that we've got coming in. Another factor is that the communication around this has not been great, and it's something I bang on about all the time. For example, I have been in meetings a while ago now, but I have been in meetings where the information given is phone 101 or phone 999. I have been in another meeting where the information is check NED, which is the non-emergency directory online. If you check that, you find out whether you need to phone the police in the first place or do you need a locksmith, as an example. Email 101 or email 101 or go online and report. If it's something which has happened, something which you're trying to give the police information about, then that is the logical place to do it. That is the easiest way. So emailing 101 if you are literate. And if everybody did that, you know what? The phones would be left clear for those who aren't digitally literate and can only use that mechanism. So that's one of the things that we need to try and communicate better about. And when I say better, it needs also with our partners, with the local authorities, because, for example, some things are communicated to the police when actually it's the local authority people need to speak to. Noise in a residential area, for example, is very much within the remit of the local authority, but we get phones coming into 101 about that. And Ian mentioned earlier about the fact when 101 was set up, there was a different vision for it. The vision originally was that it would be a clearinghouse, not just for the police, but for other things like local authorities. When it actually came in, it has become for the police, but unfortunately, we need to divert a number of calls to our partners. So there's a number of factors here. There's factors about communication, which we need to do better about. And I'm reliant on the panel, I'm reliant on the press, I'm reliant on the police in order to keep putting these messages out on how to report. Every talk I do, I go through this from the point of view of what is the best way in order to report. That's why I refer to this as an oil tanker. We can use investments, we can put more people in the call centres, we can do all those sorts of things. We have to get these other things right as well. Otherwise, we'll never get on top of it. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to, sorry, Mark, go on.
Yeah, I also had a question on 101, just about data. To understand whether 101 is working properly, and well, we know it needs to be improved, but we need to know how many people are dropping off before they get answered, and we need to know where they are going. So do you have the technological capability to measure how many people are dropping off before their calls get answered? And do you have some indication of the proportions of people where they're going? Because they're presumably either going to 999, going to an online facility, or they're just giving up.
So regarding that sort of data, that is the data which the Use of Police Power Scrutiny Panel will look at. So they get that sort of data coming through on a quarterly basis from the Force Command Centre, and that will show the drop-offs and the percentages of those drop-offs. And those are the sorts of questions that we ask back to the Force in order to, okay, so why have we had this drop-off? What are we doing about it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how that's picked up and scrutinised. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Can we move on to priority 3, please, Dave?
Thank you. Sorry about that. Priority 3 is the fight violent crime and high harm. So this is looking at those areas which are usually areas which are reported in the press, let's be honest. So it's looking at things like domestic abuse and stalking. It's looking at things like violence. It's looking about things like addiction and substance misuse. So from the point of view of actual data, Again, we appear to be going in the right direction on the measures. I'm very clear that actually we've commissioned a significant amount of action in this area, over £500,000 worth. What I'm also clear about is that we need to keep on the pressure regarding these things. So, for example, when it comes to domestic abuse, and I know we're talking about that in a paper later, I bid for additional funding to secure the DRIVE perpetrator programme in the county, and we've been awarded an extra £270,000 in order to take that forward, amongst other perpetrator programmes. I welcome the Tackling Abuse plan, which has come forward, which includes the above programmes, but it's also the expansion of the Ask for Annie scheme. I don't know if people are aware of that, but if somebody somebody is worried about domestic abuse, they can go in various places, pharmacies in particular, and ask for Annie and get support. I'm also very keen to support areas within this whole issue of abuse, which includes stalking, and I supported the National Stalking Awareness Week. From the point of view of child abuse, I was briefed on the HMIC FRS National Child Protection Inspection Post-Inspection Review, which has occurred, and I've asked the force to make certain that the recommendations within that are embedded in their work going forward. One of the big things that we've did in this quarter was we joined the Opsoteria scheme. And I know there's a particular question on that, so I won't go into detail, but that aims to ensure the strongest possible RASO cases are built from the outset, so that people who are raped or suffer sexual assault, they have the strongest possible chance of getting justice. We also bid to the Ministry of Justice for additional ISVAs and IDVAs, so support workers, and we were successful with getting £169,000 being awarded in that way. So I'm very clear that there's work to be done, and we're moving in the right direction with that as well. We attended a briefing on the pending serious violence duty, which is a duty put on specific agencies. So not just the police, but other agencies, local authorities, etc., to ensure serious violence is strategically managed in their area. And I'm very clear that one of the things that Dorset needs is a violence reduction unit. And I am working together with the local authorities, making certain that we are putting together plans in order to introduce one, and also lobbying for the funds to do that. I know that there are, I think, 18 places across the country which have VRUs. I'd very much like some of that funding to come to Dorset for us. I've also very, very clearly welcomed the change so that we don't have automatic prison release for serious sexual and violent offenders. That is actually looked at on a case-by-case basis. And one of the big ones for this time period was before this, our response to drugs within Dorset was not clear. It wasn't robust. It now is. We introduced Operation Viper, which is targeting the county lines drug gangs, making certain that we go through doors, Dorset Police do the warrants, we seize the drugs, and we get the proceeds of crime. And that, in the first day, took £100,000 worth of drugs off the streets and arrested 4 individuals. And that's happening now every week in Dorset through the neighbourhood enforcement teams. Because when we remember that drugs are responsible for 48% of acquisitive crime, the very things we've been talking about earlier, and they're responsible for half the murders in this country, that's the area that we need to get on top of. Now, I'm very, very clear, enforcement is part of the picture for that, but that now I am also clear is that we have an enforcement situation in Dorset which is much more robust than it was before. I also attended the Crime and Policing Performance Board, which has a focus on this, and this is something which I'm monitoring on a very close basis. with the Chief Constable to check that we are getting the results that we want to see. So, very quick overview of priority 3, but I hope that gave some sense of what we're up to.
Thanks very much. May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for that report. I think a couple of the questions I have relate to domestic abuse, but I think they'll be covered in the paper later, so I won't ask them now. The question I have actually relates to Opsoteria. First of all, I had to look it up because I didn't know what it was, so I now know what it is, I think. But the question I have relating to that is, Commissioner, can you confirm how this will actually improve the reported 1.7% of the 815 rape investigations concluded by Dorset Police in 2021 that led to a charge or summons?
Thank you. There's a couple of things I'll say about this. First is about Opsoteria, and then I'd like to very briefly touch on something else which also will address that question. Opsoteria is a collaboration between criminal justice practitioners and a coalition of the most qualified and talented academics in their field. The overarching aim is to develop a new operating model for the investigation and prosecution of rape, capable of national rollout. So that's the aim of Opsoteria. The programme operates through intensive work in a number of pathfinder areas and a sharing of learning gained through peer forces and through a national learning network. So this thing started in Avon and Somerset in one force and is now being rolled out. We've recently been enrolled in Operation Soteria. The launch meeting is actually in a fortnight's time, with the project team due to visit Dorset shortly afterwards. And I'm represented by my Director of Operations on that. In terms of what it will do, how will it improve the level of charges? The approach is very much a different approach, a 5-pillar model constructed from a deep analysis of the academic knowledge base. So these are the 5 pillars. Firstly and critically, and if there was one thing which I say operational Soteria will help change, it's this one. It is a suspect-focused investigation rather than victim-focused. It is about disrupting and challenging repeat offenders. It is about using procedural justice, i.e. fairness, to underpin victim engagement. It is about placing investigator knowledge, learning and well-being at the heart of improvement. And it's also about, as you would imagine from the way it's phrased and the people involved, it's also about systemic use and analysis and exploitation of data. It is evidence-based. So the methodology of what it's going to deliver is robust. It harnesses a variety of social science methodologies to collect information from people and gain insight from the analysis of data. Thus far, a handful of deep dives in force areas have been completed. And findings are being shared and recommendations are being made, which are then being implemented in the new Soteria areas with ongoing evaluation by the academics. So it's an iterative process, taking best practice from the first areas in Soteria, rolling that out. We've got our deep dive happening relatively shortly. Here in the Southwest, we've very clearly got an added advantage. We're the only region in the country with all forces in this pilot work. And we expect this to bring significant gains in time, especially in dealing with partner agencies such as the HMCTS, so the courts and the prosecution system. And I think that is one of the real benefits we've got, in that we've got 5 PCCs on the same page in the Southwest who can actually do things together. And the fact we're all in it together, I think, is a huge benefit. Some of the national learning coming from the programme is quite esoteric, but nonetheless hugely important. So what I'll do is I'll try and summarise some of the things which have come out of it already. Firstly, a large area of study and inquiry is on perpetrators as a whole and their psychology in particular. So you can see how this is spun around now, and we're thinking about the people who are perpetrating. So identifying how offenders select, groom and exploit victims and their vulnerabilities. Also, how they manipulate investigators and prosecutors, our preconceptions and our ways of thinking, and how they exploit the criminal justice system to evade justice, enabling many to repeat and refine their behaviour time after time. So it's really interesting that we're now thinking about this whole sort of system approach around perpetrators. Secondly, investigator training is being examined, focusing on core effective practice at every stage of the investigation process as a discipline and daily habit. This has proven benefits in both investigation outcomes and investigator well-being, and the value of this as a joint process with the other players in the criminal justice system cannot be underplayed. Thirdly, by partnering with academics and data specialists who allow policing to use data in an intelligent and forensic way to monitor what's going on in the system, to identify where the gaps, blockages and pinch points are to analyse root causes, to take action on these and to evaluate the effect on the system of those actions. Now, interestingly, the point I was going to make separate to Opsateria is also as part of as chairing the Criminal Justice Board, one of the key pieces of work we have is mapping the patient pathway, if I can use those terms, from the instant of reporting, the victim reports at day one, to a prosecution. When do they drop out? Why do they drop out? What do we need to do? That is being mapped in Dorset across that whole piece so as we can come up with local solutions. And obviously that will be fed back into this as well. Finally, work is also underway to help policing recognise the importance of organisational culture and how there are a myriad of subcultures operating at any point. Those who do not yet support VORG as a policing priority, those who are established change agents within our forces, and those who are new to policing and bring in a range of new experience and ideas. We must challenge those in the first basket, recognise and reward those in the second, and show those in the third that we can change and that their views are welcome in policing. So overall, Chair, this is very much a work in its infancy, but I'm very pleased that we are part of it, and there's some promising signs of real change, not only for us in Dorset, but also regionally and nationally. So that number, that low number, which is accepted nationally, this is not good enough, that will change going forward because of Opsateria.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that answer. Chair, just a quick follow-up. Obviously, Dorset will be joining Opsateria, and that's very, very welcome. We're just wondering whether, anecdotally, the Commissioner can give us some assurances that where it has already been embedded, that they have actually seen positive change, particularly in terms of support for the victim.
I think it's early days. It hasn't been embedded for that long anywhere at this time. But certainly the victim support, I understand, is one of the key things which people are looking at and changing. So, yeah, that is an area which I believe will improve with this project.
Thank you, Chair.
How will you measure success?
Success of Soteria, where it's been set up in order to change the philosophy of the way that the thinking is around rape and serious assault, and ultimately the outcome rate, so the outcome of successful prosecutions.
Successful prosecutions, I get. What about reduction?
Clarify, please.
Reduction in reported cases.
It's not a preventative system. This is about addressing what is happening with those victims who are having those assaults perpetrated against them and making certain that they get justice. That's the focus of it.
Does anybody have any more questions on priority 3? No? Then we'll move swiftly on to priority 4, rural crime. Thank you.
Thank you. So priority 4, which was to fight rural crime. And very clearly, this is a priority which is moving in the right direction. We know that the total rural crime compared to the 2019 baseline is down by 54%. We also know that our rural resources have increased. So what do I mean by that? When the rural crime team was first initiated, it was very much a thing with 2 or 3 officers in it. Philosophically, to get those officers to be able to deliver the service for the people of Dorset across the whole of Dorset was a very big ask. We're very clear now that we needed more. I had that ambition from the day I took office. I sat down with the chief constable and said, how are we going to address this? So I'm very, very pleased that rural resources have very much been increased in order to address it. And this has been seen in a number of ways now. I spoke earlier, I was asked the question earlier about crime in the rural community. We are now able to take the fight to the organised crime gangs. We are now able to start really driving. I mentioned farm equipment. I also should mention the fact that I think a couple of caravans have been given back to the owners from whence they were pinched recently. I almost lose track about how many we've got in a rural crime team because it keeps going up, but it's 17 now. I was at an event this week where that was confirmed. So that's really, really good news. I've just shared further details about the considerable investment in the rural crime team. I think it's important to make the point it's not just about the people, about those officers, those volunteers, those specials. It's also about the resources they have. And one of the points that I wanted to make was about engagement. We talked about that briefly earlier. And they now have a van which they can take to rural areas to improve the engagement. I've seen engagement numbers since October, which have been increasing generally. So that's going in the right direction. We've also got a relaunched regional joint task action group. So this is very much a meeting to share information about regional forces, and it considers joint operations and training. One of the things that we always must remember is that criminals don't respect county borders. There isn't a state line like in America here in Dorset. And the police need to operate in the same manner, which is why I've met with all of the other PCCs and the chief officers in their regions, with my Dorset police officers responsible for rural crime. We've had individual meetings to make certain we are joined up across the borders. And there are other things as PCCs across the Southwest we're talking about as to are there any further ways that we can enhance our ability in the rural area. Country Watch. So what do I mean by that? One of the things I wanted to do was bring together the rural community and have a focus on reduction of crime within it. So what we did was we put together a rural crime reduction board, which now meets on a quarterly basis, and that works through 4 work streams. It's rural resources, something called Country Watch, it is fly tipping, and it is about awareness of wildlife crime. Those are the 4 themes that it works through. The rural resources aspect looks at what we're doing about acquisitive crime and those sorts of issues in the rural area. So the Country Watch piece of that is actually about what can we do more from the point of view of watches and prevention. And we now have launched the Country Watch website, which has a number of resources for anybody interested in how to reduce crime in our countryside. And that was launched, and that will be going forward. You can find that on the website, and you'll also hear more about it as more things come into play. We are looking to see what we can do to expand further watch capability with volunteers in the rural area. And I've talked before about my aspiration for a mounted watch and something which we're calling Parish Watch, and those are works in progress at the moment. If I talk for a moment about fly tipping, by having this Rural Crime Reduction Board, by having the partners in place, by having people like the local authority there, the Environment Agency, Dorset Police, we are sharing practices, we are talking about practices which are occurring not just in Dorset but around the country, and we're looking at how we can improve that from the point of view of reducing fly tipping. This is something which is a work in progress. We have task and finish groups on this. I believe there's a specific question about that, so I'll hold my thunder in order to address that specific question. Regarding wildlife crime, we've promoted a series of rural crime team podcasts, Countrycast, which I very much supported, which was the rural crime team talking about aspects of rural crime, including wildlife crime. So in those areas, we would talk about things like sheep worrying, we would talk about poaching, we would talk about hunting with dogs, we could talk about hare coursing. All those things will be covered. And I'm very pleased that, again, from the point of view of hare coursing, we have very good links with our neighbours, with Hampshire and Wiltshire, particularly in order to make certain that we tackle that blight. Because let's make no bones about it, hare coursing is organised crime. It is about gambling. It is about the destruction of crops and fencing and gates. It is a pain for everyone, not least the farmer on whose grounds it is occurring. And I'm very clear that we need to address that. So I think I'm sort of covered that in broad brushstrokes, Chair.
If I could hand over to Pillar Lead, Les.
I don't know if Sherry wants to go first, because Sherry is going to answer the question. I've got a couple after to come up afterwards. Thank you.
I would, yes, thank you for holding your thunder for my question, Commissioner. Yes. So, can you give us a brief overview of the outcomes from these 3 multi-agency task groups that you've had? I understand that they're, as you've said, on engaging with rural communities and watches, fly tipping and rural engagement. So can you just let us know what the outcomes of those meetings, those task groups have been and where we go from here? Thank you. And before, in case it is really, really excellent to hear the progress. I remember when you first came and you said you were going to tackle rural crime, and there was a lot of scepticism as what would that amount to. Well, it seems to me it's amounting to quite a lot so far. So I'm very, very pleased, as someone who represents a rural ward, I'm very pleased to see the progress we've made so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. You're right. I mean, progress has been made, but I'm very clear that there's still a lot more that we can do. I think now that we've got tools in place which will help us. Your point about the task and finish groups. So let's go through exactly what we've been up to. So this board actually is, I'm very proud of this board because of the way, not just that it started, we started with a few partners, but it's evolved. When we've understood a bit more, we've pulled other people in. So the way it's developed has been very good. The focus also is very good, which I'm also pleased about. So a great deal of progress has been made. It's contained with the quarterly report, and there's more which will very soon be announced. But about the engagement and watch group activity, the Country Watch brand was officially launched. That came out the Task and Finish group. It was on the new website from Friday the 23rd of September, and you can visit it at countrywatchdorset.co.uk. This is a one-stop shop for all rural wildlife and heritage crime matters. Aside from useful information and prevention advice, it brings together the relevant reporting links into one place and also has simple signposting to the watch systems. The website and branding was designed collaboratively with the Rural Crime Reduction Board, so it's informed by those who have most knowledge of their communities. Much work has been done to improve engagement and to improve awareness of wildlife crime in particular. This includes the creation and promotion of the Rural Crime Team podcasts, the new Rural Crime Van being launched, and also, of course, the additional investment in the Rural Crime Team itself. All of these developments have been shared and discussed with the Rural Crime Reduction Board to ensure that the ideas are informed by those with most relevant experience and the awareness messages can be transmitted as far as possible. In terms of fly tipping, I am pleased to report that through the Rural Crime Reduction Board, key partners agreed they would focus on improving the sharing of intelligence on fly tipping and related crimes. This can only help key agencies tackle this unacceptable practice. And also from that, I can tell you that at the last meeting, which was focused on fly tipping, there is also this sharing of best practice now, not just within Dorset and within agencies, but around the country. So we will be driving that sort of stuff forward. I won't talk about next meeting because this is a report rather than an advert. Thank you very much indeed.
Les.
Thank you, Chair. Les Fry, Dorchester West, representing Commissioner. I thank you for the increase you put in the team. I think that's welcome for Dorset, the numbers they're increasing. I note that the crimes flagged as rural have gone down by 41% or 34%. Identifying rural crime is always a challenge because what is rural crime and where does it go? Are we getting smarter with the flagging, or has there been a genuine reduction in crimes that are rural there, or why have those numbers gone down? Have you been able to work that one out? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Mr. Harold on this one from the point of view of the numbers.
It's a good question, Councillor. The easiest thing to say is they are very small numbers. So it's listed in the parentheses there, 34 crimes reduced, which does give a dramatic effect on a minus 41% rise. So quarter to quarter, I wouldn't want to speculate. The recording is, as you say, challenging because of the way the National Crime Recording works. The systems in place, Dorset Police have remained the same in that time. The Dorset Police's crime recording is very good by inspectorate standards, but hard to say on a quarter basis whether there's been a particular change or it's just a relatively small drop in numbers which has created that.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm very pleased to see that decent job that you had with your rural crime team recently, as you've mentioned it. That was a very good. Do you know that did that come from a good stop? Was that intelligence-led, or was that a partner agency that worked that one out? Because clearly the process is working.
I believe it was a bit of all three, but you will understand, Les, that I am not operational and will not necessarily know the inside outs of all the investigations. What I am very clear about is it was a huge win, not just for Dorset Police, but more critically for those victims who had had their possessions taken away from them. And to actually see the joy in somebody's face when they got their generator back. Because the piece that is forgotten, right, when it comes to this sort of crime, is you're not just taking away the thing. If you take a ATV away, or if you take a tractor away, you're not just taking that item, you are taking away the ability for that person to perhaps get a crop in from the field, to actually do the thing they necessarily have to do in the next couple of weeks in order to provide food for the nation. And it is time-bound because of the weather. So this has huge issues, not just from the point of view of the thing, because everybody can say, oh, well, they'll get that back on insurance. But actually, that will take time. It may be too late. The supply chains for that particular item may be really slow. So this is not in any way a victimless crime. And that's the reason I was so pleased that we were given these things back and we were making a true difference with the rural crime team. That's what this investment is meant to give us. Thank you.
Commissioner, I echo all your thoughts and comments there, and just hope that anybody watching this recording makes the time to go and track and asset mark all their equipment, because that helps Dorset Police and us to get the equipment back to people. So thank you for that. Commissioner, what preparation are officers teams getting to going into the rural crime team? Are they getting any training that you're aware of, or where does that go?
Yes, they are. My understanding is they are getting specific training. I was with one of the officers, in fact, the inspector leading them yesterday. That's one of the things he told me. It's one of the things he presents on. What its detail is, I don't have that detail, but they are getting specific rural crime training.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's the end of my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Les. We've got a question coming from Dave Taylor, who's also the co-lead on this area. Dave.
Sorry, my things are moving a bit slow here. Commissioner, thank you very much for the report. I've been listening for the last hour and it's incredibly interesting. The results are outstanding. My concern and question is the fact is the results, outstanding as they are, have we portrayed this to the community of the farming community and the residents, the rural residents of Dorset, to making sure that the interaction is being communicated fully so they understand they're not on their own and it's being involved as a team across the county? That's what I'm interested in, to see whether or not it's being picked up by the other bodies as well, so that the people realise that we are all involved in this.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. That's a really, really good question. One of the things that I'm clear about is we don't make enough noise about the good stuff that we are doing. And when I say we, I'm talking about Dorset Police, and I'm talking about our office as well, and the link up. I know that what we do is when we have changes, when we make a difference, Dorset Police pump it out on social media. The Rural Crime Team is one of the biggest users of social media within the Dorset Police. I know that we make as much noise as we can in order to reassure the public about the changes which are occurring. Your particular point about farmers, both the police and indeed my office have been at the county shows this year across the summer. Now, thank goodness, after COVID, we can have those great shows. And we've been at every one and had a lot of engagement with the public. And in fact, I actually spoke for a couple of minutes at the Dorset County Show talking about rural crime issues in the main ring. So we're doing everything we can in order to drive that forward. In fact, tomorrow I am actually meeting with a group of farmers. I will be reiterating what the changes are to the rural crime team, hearing their views, hearing their issues, making the point which Councillor Fry made very well about the prevention side of it. And we will make as much noise as possible about the good stuff, because actually that reassures people. And you know something else? It actually helps people to have the confidence to report, which builds intelligence, allows us to stop the criminals more. Thank you.
Can I come back in there, Chair?
Say again, Dave?
Can I come back in?
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is also instigating the fact is like the Young Farmers Association, and specifically because of the rural districts we've got, and in my ward as well, I'm thinking of publicans, public houses, and basically schools and things like that. Just basically a broad, a cross bench, so that we can actually make sure that it is a acceptable thing by the rural communities to actually have a conversation. And the thing is to not feel as though at being individual, but being as part of a community spirit.
Thank you for that. I agree with it. For example, the National Farmers Union sit on the Rural Crime Reduction Board, just to take one example there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Good questions there. Thank you. Moving on then to priority 5, putting victims and communities first.
Again, there has been much work around this area for victims and communities. We've had, I mentioned it earlier, we've had the additional funding for more posts for the ISVAs and the IDVAs. This is the Independent Domestic Violence Advisors. That award totals 260k in addition to a previous 152k confirmed. And we've also got funding confirmed in this area until 2025, which I'm very grateful about. There has been created a mobile app to assist officers in the consideration of appropriate out-of-court disposals when dealing with perpetrators. So this is where it is more appropriate, rather than to bring somebody into the criminal justice system. We can think probably there are some areas where young people it would be more appropriate to use an out-of-court disposal, and that is what the mobile app is intended to do. We celebrated the nominees and winners of the Criminal Justice Awards in Dorset. There was a particular Outstanding Achievement Award, which was given to a prison officer at HMP Verne at the prison on Portland. And work continues to expand the use of live link facilities for officers to give evidence at court, which is important. Anything we can do to actually improve court efficiency at this moment in time is a good thing. If we look at business and retail crime, we have something now called the Safer Dorset Business Partnership, which meets on a quarterly basis and considers a number of issues, one of which is cybercrime. And we initiated the cybercrime survey with businesses in order to identify gaps and training needs, and that's been fed back into the police. Regarding vulnerability, I appeared before the Home Affairs Committee to talk about tackling drugs. I talked earlier about the enforcement side, but I'm very, very clear that there are 3 planks which need to be addressed. We need tough enforcement, but we also need effective treatment and recovery. And part of my work as co-chair of the Addiction and Substance Misuse Portfolio is to input into government and also to actually address things like the implementation of the 10-year drug strategy and what that's going to look like for Dorset. But the last one is the one that I really worry we're not spending enough time thinking about, both locally and nationally, and which is what I'm intent on driving forward, which is about the prevention. The prevention, the stopping the generational demand for drugs. And that's something which I'm inputting to government on a regular basis about. So that's my piece, because basically if we can do this, if we can reduce the harm in our society from this area, we actually do a huge service to society. Regarding hate crime, I put together a blog piece reflecting on the success of the 2022 Prejudice-Free Dorset Conference, which we held, and which centred on no place for hate. And I'm very clear that we have great work with third-party reporting centres, which I also understand not every place in the country has. So this is, again, a way that we are really being ahead of the curve with this. So thank you very much indeed. That's the priority 5, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Chris Rigby, have you got any, as a pillar lead, have you got any questions you'd like to follow up on?
Yeah, thank you for bringing me in, Chair. Sorry, please excuse me, I've got a bit of a flu, so hence me not being there in person today and my voice feeling a bit croaky. David, the question I had was around the recorded hate crimes. It's good to see these coming down, and obviously it's the recorded ones. So my question was going to be around, because it's dropped, is that ones which are being reported, a reduction report, and do you feel that there's been strides within the various communities around Dorset that people feel safe to come and report hate crimes if they're being made? I know you made reference there to the extra report in place, but just to give an idea of the links being made into the BME communities and others who may have historically not felt as safe bringing issues to the police to report them. Could you just talk a little bit around that, if possible, please?
Chris, can you just repeat the last bit, because it's not a great line, and I do understand that you are grappling with a cold as well. So if you can just talk to the last piece you said there. I've got the bit about can I talk about hate crime and the reduction and what I feel about that, etc. But it was the last piece that I just needed to hear.
Yeah, certainly. It was just around the comfort of people in minority communities who may have historically not felt as safe bringing reports of crime to the police, just building those bridges within the community. Could you just talk a little bit around that and how it's how you feel that you're assisting, with this coming to the front at the moment and people feeling safe and able to bring and report these crimes as well?
Thank you. It's a really, really good question. And it's one which is a work in progress, if I'm honest. You've heard me talk here before about engagement and connectivity and the need in order to address that. That goes for every single community in Dorset. And I heard the same thing from the diverse communities of BCP, for example, as I heard from rural communities, etc. I do know that this is on the agenda. It is specifically on the agenda of those neighbourhood policing teams working with such communities. And I know that they have a mandate from the Chief Constable to basically improve their engagement. This is part of the overall engagement piece. If you remember, I talked about the work in that space. I referred to it as CDEM earlier, which is the Chief Constable's response about engagement. That is part of it. And actually the person leading that also used to lead Prejudice Free Dorset. So my understanding is that that will be integrated into their thinking as they go forward. The other piece around that is I see it on the ground from the point of view of I know that police presence in areas with communities which are more diverse is increasing. I know there's also a lot of work being done around positive action, which is the police's initiative in order to recruit people from diverse communities into Dorset Police, so it becomes more reflective of the communities which they serve. I know that in particular, there is a lot of work of engagement around that. Ultimately for them, the ultimate aim is to recruit police officers, but nevertheless, there is a lot of engagement coming through that route as well. Does that give you some reassurance around that, Chris?
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Do you have anything else, Chris, at all?
That's it for the moment. Thanks,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions? Mark?
Thank you. There's been some media publicity recently about the supposed failings of the common platform system in the criminal justice service. I wonder if you could comment on whether that's impacting on the police. Thank you.
My understanding, and I will look to Mr. Harold to correct me on the detail, but my understanding is the common platform actually hasn't been introduced in Dorset yet, but there is a delay to its introduction. So actually, it hasn't affected us yet from that point of view.
I think that's broadly the case. We had an update at the Criminal Justice Board, which the Commissioner chairs the other day, to say that the platform isn't ready to come into Dorset this year. So some of the things which have been reported on in other areas aren't being experienced at Dorset in this case. But I will say it's a pretty complicated area. We can always come back with further information if that's helpful.
Oh, it'd just be useful to know the timetable for its introduction and whether it's being delayed, things like that, for future reference. Thank you.
We can come back with that.
Thanks, Mark. This panel's looked in the past at the Force Pulse survey, which is the survey that is conducted to identify the well-being of police officers and police staff. You mentioned in your report that a new one's just been issued. What did you learn from that report, Commissioner?
So very clearly, this is part of Make Every Penny Count, which I'll talk about in a little bit more in a moment. But let's address it now. So this is about the Force Pulse survey. So compared to previous year, around half of our respondents stated that their health and well-being had declined. 39% stated that they had generally maintained a good level, and 7% said their health and well-being had improved. Around 1/3 of respondents said they were able to take a meal break most of the time, and around the same proportion said 34% said they got at least 7 hours of sleep most of the time. Both are actually slight improvements on previous years. There were, however, more mixed results on the awareness of support and intervention. Dorset Police provides a range of specialist wellbeing support, and respondents were asked which services they were aware of, which they had used, and if they had found them helpful. Awareness of occupational health and the counselling and employee assistance programmes remains good, but awareness of the private medical interventions and counselling schemes remains low as per previous years. 59% of respondents said that in the past 12 months, they have experienced significant stress and or mental health issues that have affected their daily life, which is a marginal increase. Around 1/4 of staff, 24%, and 1/3 of officers, 34%, said they did not disclose this, as they thought that the force could not offer any support or that disclosure would negatively impact them. The coronavirus pandemic negatively impacted the physical and mental health of most respondents, plus also affected their stress, anxiety, and ability to sleep. However, far fewer people were financially impacted. More holistically, 3/4 of respondents, 76%, agreed that Dorset Police is generally a good place to work, which is a modest improvement. More recently, the Alliance Chief Medical Officer role was advertised after the post holder gave notice. A well-established Navy medic was appointed, who has responsibility for the healthcare of some 11,000 individuals across the Southwest. He has a long notice period, but will be starting in February next year. And finally, as of November, we will be moving to new occupational health arrangements in Dorset, which should allow a better localised and tailored service, as we will bring clinical and medical administrative staff in-house, rather than being delivered by the NHS. This decision was specifically to address the long lead times for officers and staff to be seen by external occupational health, and it's expected will lead to more timely support, treatment, and return to work. I hope that gives you the update that you were looking for, Chair. Obviously, from my perspective, this is something that I talk to the Chief Constable about on a regular basis. The importance of the health and well-being of Dorset Police is his responsibility, but it's something that I want to make certain is at the fore of his mind, which I know it is, because it is as much about functional efficiency and good, healthy, happy people function better as it is about the individuals, which obviously he cares about as well. So it's about making certain that we keep this on the agenda. Some of the marginal improvements there, which we've seen, are reassuring, but I'd like to see this going forward, and we will see where this goes in coming months.
You've answered my question yet, that you've given the panel reassurance that you are dealing with the Chief Constable on this very important issue, and it would be useful to know that you are holding the Chief Constable to account on this issue. Does anybody have any further questions on priority 5? I'm just getting messages here from the panel that it would be useful to take a 10-minute break right now, which is slightly earlier than I intended to do. But it's 12:10 at the moment. If we could reconvene at 12:20. Thank you. Right, good afternoon, welcome back everybody. Moving on to priority 6, which is make every penny count. Dave.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. It's making every penny count. So there's a number of things here from the point of view of I'd like to make the panel aware of. First of all, PCCs and chiefs have agreed to change the regional governance of the Southwest Collaboration Programme. So this is an existing programme, and what we've done is basically streamline it. So that allows funds to be redistributed to programme delivery and policy development in a way that they weren't before. I've also, through my annual report, provided an update on the force's budget and funding, alongside detail of the successful bids that have been made this year. So I direct people to the annual report for that information. When we're looking at the theme of efficiency, the year 2 uplift target of 49 additional officers was exceeded by 21 officers. So we've had 130 recruits and 31 transferees during the 2021 to 22 period. Innovation Board approval for an initiative that delivers the automatic transfer of intelligence reports to the NISH system. So this is something which actually saves staff time and reduces double keying. People will be aware that I have a thing about the bureaucracy for police officers. I'd much rather they were out on the streets doing what they need to do, behind the necessary computer doing what they need to do, actually catching people rather than doing bureaucracy, and that helps immensely with that. We've referred to the Pulse survey, and we've just dealt with that, which, as I say, I'm very keen that we keep our eyes on that sort of thing. Regarding the Police and Crime Commissioner Review Part 2, which is a piece of legislation which has been consulted on and hasn't yet come through Parliament, it didn't provide any further advice on the co-terminosity of police and fire services. In the Southwest, PCCs have agreed collectively amongst us that we do not see evidence supporting us seeking a transfer of fire service governance. I've always been very clear that Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service are doing what they're doing. They're doing a good job. I do not seek any change to the governance around that. The philosophy and cooperation, we are working with our partners. We are all the time with our partners trying to improve how we work, and it pays dividends. For example, we worked with BCP and Dorset councils to bid for the Home Office Safer Streets Fund, and with Dorset Council we were very successful and were awarded £250,000. So that will go to work in order to preserve the safety of streets, and I believe it's allocated to Weymouth in the first instance. So thank you very much. That was a very quick update of that. And would you like to move to the questions?
I would, yes. But before I start the questions, just seeking some assurance more than anything. You highlighted there that the number of recruits, if that's the right term, to the police has exceeded that was actually envisaged. What assurance has your team sought from the Chief Constable's team that they can afford that in year?
Yeah, that's part of our ongoing scrutiny. We do it all the time. Julie, as I say, sits on the Resource Control Board. Those conversations were had when we've actually collectively spoken about bidding for extra officers, which also is occurring. We have made certain that they can be paid for. So I'd very much like to reassure the Chair on that front.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So moving on to finance questions. Is the capital programme slippage causing any impact on the revenue budget? You're obviously you're having difficulty purchasing cars. Therefore, has that cost now been picked up in the revenue budget through maintenance, as an example?
So firstly, thank you very much indeed for the report, which is in the quarterly report, which I commend to the panel. I'm now going to go through these questions. I think I should make just one point, is a lot of these questions actually are very clearly referring to, although it doesn't mention it specifically, the cost of living crisis and how that will affect the force. And I think very clearly, these are the areas which we can see there being a potential for it affecting the force. So let me go through them in the first situation. Is the capital programme slippage causing any impact on the revenue budget, e.g. higher maintenance for an ageing vehicle fleet? Look, there's both positive and negative revenue impacts of the slippage to the capital programme. Whilst we've got the increased maintenance costs for fleet due to delays in their replacements, we've also got some delays in some revenue costs for new projects. So, for example, licence fees for new systems are incurred later than budgeted. So there is a sort of an up and down effect going on here. Overall, we believe the revenue impact of the capital programme slippage is very much at the margin at this moment in time, rather than a significant pressure. And it is manageable within where we are at this moment in time.
Thank you for that. At this moment in time, and obviously it is an area that you are monitoring closely because things can change quickly, as we've seen over the last 10 days. So thank you for that. The pay award, which was for the, correct me if I'm wrong, was 5% in year. And it wasn't fully funded by central government grant, so therefore that's got to be found from within your own resources. What impact is this likely to have in future budget rounds? And for information, is this grant a one-off, i.e. in year, or will it be recurring?
Well, firstly, the grant's been confirmed for 3 years, covered by the spending review. Nationally, 70 million has been provided for the current year and 140 million per annum for 2023-24 and 2024-25. So, look, you're absolutely right. Whilst this additional grant is welcome, it still produces a shortfall in 2023-24 of around £650,000 for the police officers' pay award, net of the grant, and an estimated 1.1 million for police staff, assuming their pay increase is in line with police officers. So to put this into context, what we're looking at is a 1.75 million shortfall, which is equivalent to around £6 on the Band D charge, before we consider any pay award assumptions for next year or any other pressures. So it's absolutely a significant challenge. And I think it's important that we make a number of points here. Number one, you will be aware in the wider context that Dorset receives one of the lowest amounts from the national grants through the national funding formula, and I am very clearly lobbying on that on a continuous basis in order to address this. Let's be clear about the precept. I am absolutely keen, and I would love not to be able to actually ask for money from the people of Dorset. The situation is that we are under severe pressure from the point of view of the challenge which faces us, and we need to address that. I am determined that we will have additionality when we come to the precept and what happens with that. But you just said it. The economic situation is volatile, let's use that word, fluid. We're going to be keeping our eye on this assiduously over the next few months. We're going to make certain that we know exactly where we are and exactly what we can do and what are the benefits. And I'll make certain that we have the money in order to keep the people of Dorset safe.
So for the people watching this, whilst obviously you haven't got the detail at the moment, you can confirm that this the pay rise is going to impact on the precept, if nothing else.
Yes, at this moment in time.
Thank you for that. And moving on, capital borrowing is well below budgeted, but the report mentions pressure from increasing interest rates. Again, what we've sort of been talking in the round. What assurance can the PCC give that the capital programme will not become unaffordable due to the increase in costs due to inflation?
So the capital programme is scrutinised quarterly by the Capital Strategy Group, as well as being considered within other relevant boards, such as the Strategic Estates Board. Estates is an area particularly impacted by inflation, but this has been taken into account as part of the procurement processes. For example, using fixed price contracts to remove the inflation risk. A new prioritisation matrix has also been introduced this year to further enhance the assurance that funding is focused on estate schemes that contribute most to the priorities of both the Chief Constable and myself. The affordability of the capital programme is a key consideration of the budget setting process and the medium-term financial plan. So I just referred to the fact we'll be scrutinising everything very, very intently. We'll be going into this situation over the next few months. Whilst there are increased costs from increased interest rates, there's also increased income being generated from interest earned on our cash balances, which do offset each other this year, and this could have been clearer within the report. Going forward, this does create additional pressure. However, we are working with our Treasury management advisors to look at the latest interest rate forecasts and developing the most cost-effective strategy for borrowing over the longer term and within the budget. So actually, we've got a flip-flop because of the interest at this moment in time.
Thank you for that. Interesting on the fixed rate contract, because one would assume the company that you're contracting to will build in those interest rates, so we'll be paying for them up front rather than the risk of them coming up from behind, should we say.
Except with the volatility of the markets, whatever they may have built in, they may not have taken into account the whole of the interest rates. So, you know, we could win as well. So I think we've just got to plough on. That's the best way that we can actually be cautious and conserve where we are. I would not want an open contract which changed every month. That would be a nightmare, not least in management costs for Dorset Police and us looking at it every 5 minutes.
Thank you for that. I know we've talked about this in the round, but very briefly, what is the overall impact of increasing interest rates to your budget and the Chief Constable's budget, and what measures are being put in place in order to maintain your, well, primarily policing effect?
This is one about basically how the overheads are going and the overhead costs. So the force continues to utilise both regional and national procurement processes as much as possible. So this means that we get the best price for goods and services, but we also streamline the process of procurement itself, which also has a cost. So as part of the budget setting process, the force is undertaking a cost challenge process internally, which reviews the existing budgets and identifies where things can be done differently in order to reduce costs. The force is also investing in innovations such as process automation in order to create efficiencies in the future, as well as undertaking an externally commissioned piece of research to interrogate incoming demand and provide options for how it might be more efficiently managed, as well as energy efficiency initiatives in estates projects to reduce energy costs going forward. So the word cost challenge, the word about actually making certain we are as efficient as possible, is embedded within the force processes and in the discussions we're having with the Chief Constable.
Yeah, I suppose the other element of this, which was in the sort of question, is what, with the increase in interest rates, what measures being put in place in order to maintain PCC, Chief Constable effect?
So obviously interest rates are very topical. They're very high on our agenda to manage. At the moment, the amount of additional interest we're able to earn on our cash balances is offsetting the slightly higher amounts we've had to pay on our temporary borrowing, and we're managing that very closely as we go forward, but working very closely with our specialist advisors within this area about how, looking forward, what the future for interest rates might look like, when is the most optimum time to do long-term borrowing, and how we can make that process most cost-effective for the council taxpayer ultimately. So it's very much on our agenda and looking at when we need to borrow, when we can delay it, what's the optimum process for doing that.
Thanks for that. And finally, from me, has the PCC sought assurance from the Chief Constable that the higher than planned secondment of officers is not impacting on Dorset Police effect?
Yes is the answer. Although the secondment of officers creates large variances within the financial monitoring, it actually only relates to a small number of people, around 14 full-time equivalents in total. So there's a couple of things here. Each secondment is considered on a case-by-case basis. So they're assessed on the impact of the officer being seconded elsewhere and how they might be backfilled. And also the skills and knowledge that they would develop and bring back into the force at the end of the secondment. So the secondments don't just work for the individual, they work for increasing the effectiveness of the organisation as a whole and bring back new skills and qualities in order to help Dorset Police. There's also another factor here. These secondments are with national bodies. So they're with things like the National Police Air Service, the Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, College of Policing. So they are with national bodies. And again, as a small force, having somebody who understands that national body, having somebody who can give Dorset a bit of a voice with that national body, I believe is a benefit for Dorset as a whole. So at this moment at this level, I am content that the effectiveness of the force is not impacted from the secondment of officers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Toby.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I've been listening to this, and I must admit I'm a little concerned because a lot of the reassurance that we've heard there seems to me just a description of basic good practice, things that we'd normally be expecting you to do anyway, trying to do things in an efficient and a solid way that doesn't cost any more than it needs to. But we've heard a lot about the pressures, but we've heard very few real specifics. And we've heard there is a pressure, but how big is that pressure? And are there any mitigating actions that have to be considered in order to balance the budget? And if not, where's the extra money coming from? Thank you, Chair.
So you're asking for specifics. So I'm going to hand over to Julie in order to address that. But my point is you say that business as usual, and it's only business as usual. I would reiterate back to you, Councillor Johnson, that business as usual has to be about looking at this on a regular basis, has to be looking at scrutinising through our normal practices. It isn't something that we suddenly put in place all new practices in order to address. We should be looking at cost containment and efficiency on a regular basis, and that's what we do. But for specifics which come out of those meetings, I'll hand you over to Julie.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we do monitor this on a monthly basis. We go through in quite significant levels of detail about different variances, etc. Part of the difficulty we've got in the current year is we don't know the outcome of some of our pressures. So, for example, police officer pay award has been announced. We know what that is. That's factored into our forecast. The police staff pay award, whilst it was initially announced, had a reopener clause in it. So if the pay award for officers was higher than that already awarded to police staff, then there was the opportunity to reopen that. That is in place at the moment. It has been reopened and there are national negotiations happening to settle that. But at this point in time, we don't know what that outcome is going to be. So whilst we are managing, we are reviewing, the force is looking at all of their service options. They are undertaking a cost challenge process where they're reviewing all of their costs, looking at how they can do things differently, how they can try and make things more efficient. That work is still ongoing, but at this minute in time, we don't actually know all of what those pressures are. So it is quite difficult to be specific about this is the impact of the cost of living, etc. In terms of some of the other more commonly discussed pressures like fuel costs, energy costs, they're actually in line with the budget assumptions we made this year. So that isn't an ongoing pressure in the current year. Looking forward, that is likely to be further pressures in next year's budget, which the Force are addressing through the cost challenge process. So there's a lot of work that the Force are doing behind the scenes, and that we are assured that they are working to bring the budget back in line with the budget by the year end, so that we aren't overspent at the year end. So that's there.
If I could just come back in, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that answer. And I appreciate that it's all very volatile and that we don't know. But the fact that we don't know and we can't know doesn't fill me with too much, obviously, assurances. I'd rather hear we don't know what the pressures are, therefore we're going to work to continue to keep it fresh, than to keep it sorted, than we're sure all the problems are going to be fine. We're sure we can cope with it. I'd rather hear, we don't know, we can't know, and this is how we're going to make sure that we don't get caught out by that. And just coming back to you, Commissioner, on your answer to me, I know that you have to monitor it. I know that you do monitor it regularly, and that's exactly my point. So when we come to these sorts of discussions where we're trying to dig into it a little bit deeper, I'd expect you to be doing those things. I think we all would expect you to be doing those things, as it's the bare minimum for good process and due process. So I'm just looking for that little bit more insight into this, that little bit more specifics going forward. And I appreciate the answer that we've got there. Thank you, Chair.
So, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Johnson. I am slightly confused about what more you would want me to do, because if you're asking me to wave a magic wand and create a money tree for Dorset Police, that's not within my gift. All we can do is work with the information we currently have. We've been very open and transparent with where we are. This is a report about Q1, actually, but we are talking about what's going forward. At this moment in time, there is an immense amount of work going on about budget building and going forward. I am uncertain about what else my office could do in order to do any more around that, apart from have conversations with Dorset Police on a regular basis, which we're doing, and build those budgets for the future. If you can help me with that, I'd very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. And there is always the measure of last resort that one has some form of reserve up one sleeve should things go horrendously pear-shaped. I get that. I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time. I'm going to swap round item 6 and item 7. Sorry. What? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't. I do apologise, Ian. I haven't got my glasses on.
Yeah, I'm only 6'4". Just picking up on the point made by Councillor Johnson, unless I've misread it, looking at Julie for this, because it might be my misunderstanding. I mean, the reality is that most probably within this year, you're showing that our reserves are most probably going to be less than we started off with at the beginning of the year. Whilst it's going to be difficult to say exactly how much that is, unless I've misread it in there, where you've got some pressures that are a little bit unknown at the moment, there's sufficient in the reserves to soak that up in this year. Have I read that right in the finances?
Absolutely. At Q1, we are predicting that if that variance came to fruition at the end of the year, it would reduce our general reserves, but down to the minimum level. So it's within the acceptable range at the moment.
Yeah, so that goes back to something that you covered with us at precept time, was that the aim was to slightly build them up to get a little bit above the minimum of the range, which I think HMRC and normal finance practice says is the range. So we won't go under it, but we go backwards a little bit compared to what we were when we go back to 18 months ago, don't we, effectively? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Ultimately, your reserves are there for your rainy day when there are problems, and it is currently starting to rain. So we may well need to use some of those if we can't address all of these pressures within the year. But that is certainly the aim, and the challenge that we're putting onto the force is bringing that back so that it is on budget and we don't have to dip into those reserves. But that may or may not be possible.
Thank you.
Bobby, you've got a question?
I have, and it's partly what Councillor Johnson started and then Ian tried to clarify. I think my question is the fact that we keep getting these different answers. So the first answer to Ian was, yes, we've got in-year pressures, but we're going to use our reserves. Finished with the supplementary, which finished with, well, we won't dip into our reserves because we're quite okay with where we are. So the initial question that I understood Toby to ask was, what are our current in-year pressures? What's the cost of living figure, and how, so specifically, what is that figure and how has that affected the budget? And then with that pressure, how are you looking to make up that difference? So is it from reserves or is it from further efficiencies?
Well, I think although it seems to have got scrambled in our communication, I think it is exactly that. We're looking at all options as we continue to go forward. So you ask about the cost of living crisis. We have talked about that in the context of the fuel, and those assumptions originally meant that actually we are continue to be mitigated in the fuel inflation, which is one of the biggest drivers of the cost of living practice. Then we comes to the issue around the pay award, of which half was, when I say half, a significant proportion was given to us from the central government, but not enough in order to cover it. So the two areas that we can get this from is by making those efficiencies, which we've outlined, of the efficiency program and what we're trying to do, and also from the point of view of, if necessary, we would have to dip into reserves. But exactly what we're going to be able to do and how we're going to be able to do it with the volatility of what's going on, we can't confirm at this time, which is why I've been very clear. This is about an ongoing scrutiny, an ongoing weekly discussion about this. I'll give you an example. There was a fiscal mechanism last Friday, part of which was to reverse the national insurance tax, which was put in place beforehand. We're working through the implications of that. That would be a benefit to us from an employer point of view. But that's what I mean. This is volatile. This is constantly changing. We are constantly monitoring it. So I'm not quite certain. If you want me to give you an answer, we're going to do this now, we can't do that because we're constantly monitoring it. And it will depend on what we need to do, depending on the situation as we get closer to it, and as part of the budget build for next year. So that's why I'm having a difficulty giving you here's a magic wand, this is how we're going to fix it, because we've got two areas we could use. We've got efficiencies and we've got those reserves in order to address this. And depending on how much we need to do, we'll develop going forward, which is why we're keeping an ongoing scrutiny on it.
Okay, so I'm specifically asking about your current in-year pressure. What is that figure?
So the current pressures that we're facing is the 950,000 that we are predicting at Q1 that we would potentially be overspent by.
Right, and so when we're looking therefore at the end of the Q2 and how are your figures looking for that, are you expecting to be closing that gap? Because obviously you will have been, and I understand Dave is saying, sorry, Commissioner is saying that we're going to start looking at further efficiencies and everything else, but actually that's business as usual. So what are you going to do that's different, because the cost of living is so very unusual and it's still very unpredictable? Are you thinking actually that's where our reserves will come into play, because you've said yes and you've said no to all of that? Or are you going to be looking to perhaps do things differently but do you even have at the moment some sort of indication of which way those figures are going? Because I certainly know within the council we've done our outturn reports, etc. We know exactly where we are, exactly what the gap we need to close. And I think that's the question that I'm asking: is what is that gap, and what is it that you need to close, and what you're hoping to close, and by when?
So that position changes every day at the minute. So we are constantly monitoring it. We are looking and challenging the force to look at ways that they can do things differently, bring those costs down. That is absolutely our first option for closing the budget gap at the current time. Using reserves is always the last resort. But we have to report on, if that comes to fruition, what does that mean for us? Because that has an impact on our financial resilience. So that's why that is referred to. But our first approach is absolutely to challenge the force to do things differently and reduce those costs down. So we would be looking, as we go through the year, to constantly develop those forecasts. So Q2, with the change in the national insurance, might be a little bit better. It may well be similar to where we are now, because some things have got worse and then other things have improved. So it is a constantly moving and evolving picture that we are putting an awful lot of attention onto, so that we can try and come back on budget by the end of the year.
Are you, Dave, you got a question? Quickly, because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. It's just a very quick one. It's an observation really outside. Communication central government? I don't hear very much going on here. So what are they actually doing to actually help us? That's the major question, because I don't hear anything.
So communication with central government about funding for Dorset goes on an extremely regular basis. I have harried the policing minister who has gone, and also the Home Secretary. I have made the case for Dorset specifically. Before I came into office, there was no evidence. There was just, we need more money. I got Dorset Police to give me an evidence pack of the situation, of the demand, particularly in the summer. I have harried the Home Office. I have specifically had individual meetings with the Home Office. The upfront part of that is in common with other police and crime commissioners. We now have the Home Office consulting on the national funding formula on two specific areas. One is sparsity, i.e. rural implications, and the other is seasonality and transient populations. Neither of those were in the national funding formula. Neither of those were taken into account. They are core to our ability going forward, and they need to be in the national funding formula so Dorset gets the fair shake it needs to get going forward. So there's a lot of work going on with this. I am hoping we had a meeting with the old policing minister to occur in July. You may be aware that the government's had a bit of a flip-flop and changed and all the rest of it. So I'm now dealing with a new policing minister and a new Home Secretary. So the game started again. But nonetheless, I believe I am able, I've already made the case to the new policing minister and told him that we need more money in Dorset, and I need him to come and see us in order for us to address it. And I'm going to keep doing that. So I hope, David, that gives you some assurance. I don't shout about it a lot here, unless somebody asks me, because quite frankly, until I get a big win, what's the point? But we're going to keep on pushing and keep on pushing, because this is about the needs of the people of Dorset.
Thank you very much. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Sherry, very briefly, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your responses, which I have been very helpful, and I have a much clearer picture now. My question is, so when you're bearing down on costs this year and looking at reserves, can we ask for assurance that you're also doing that mindful of next year's budget pressures? Because in the context of the cost of living crisis which our residents are facing, you're already mentioning the possibility of precept council tax rises. And of course, we need to be mindful of the fact that everybody, all of our residents are feeling squeezed, and they will be looking to us to keep the council tax as low as we reasonably can.
You're absolutely right, and that's what I want too. And from the point of view of how we're looking at this, you're absolutely right. We're not looking at this just as the in-year situation, where you're looking at it across the medium-term financial strategy and how it plays out in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and longer. And it is very clearly something which, is referred to as business as usual earlier. It's not business as usual. From the point of view, when the Chief Constable was appointed by me, one of the clear things I asked him to be aware of, one of the clear criteria for his appointment was, did he understand money? Did he understand costs? Did he understand that aspect of it? So actually, it's not just business as usual. There's a whole new emphasis on that area and the way that Dorset Police builds budgets since the new Chief Constable has come in at the behest of the Police and Crime Commissioner and his office in order to make certain we are as efficient as possible. So that will continue and keep going.
Moving on to item 7, if I may. Mark, you need to do something.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's quite clear looking at the agenda that we're going to exceed the 3 hours that are set out for meeting lengths in the Constitution. So, Chair, you'll just need to look for somebody to propose and second extending that meeting, and then look for a raise of hands to that effect.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Right, moving swiftly on. I'm conscious, May, that you need to leave.
Yes, Chair, but I've kind of managed to jiggle around stuff a bit, so I will need to leave by about 1:30.
Excellent, that solved my problem, thank you. So therefore, I was going to reverse everything around and get you to ask the questions and then Dave to do first. Dave, first off, from the panel, can you please pass on to your staff the panel's thanks for the excellent work that was done with these 2 papers. Not only the actual papers themselves, but the preliminary work that went into them, where your office worked with this panel to produce some excellent key lines of inquiry. I'm going to hand over to you, Dave. Item 7, domestic violence advisors. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. So the purpose of this paper is to update members on the Police and Crime Commissioner's work on domestic abuse. I'm not going to go through every paragraph, but I will pick up quite a lot of it. And the reason I want to do that is this is a really, really important subject. It is one close to my heart. I'm not going to reiterate why. People have heard that before. But this is something which has ramifications, not just for the victim at the time, but if there are children involved, this is one of the adverse childhood experiences which drives their future as well. And it's something that I care deeply and passionately about getting right. So first of all, the context. What actually is the definition of domestic abuse? Because I think it's worthwhile just talking about that. It's any incident or patterns of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over, or who are or have been intimate partners or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. So this can encompass, but it's not limited to, it's psychological, it's physical, it's sexual, it's financial, it's emotional. And it talks about controlling behaviour, but also coercive behaviour. So controlling behaviour is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate. Coercive behaviour is an act or pattern of acts of assaults, threats, and intimidation or other abuse to use to harm, punish, or frighten their victim. So whilst it's not a specific criminal offence in itself, criminal offences may be committed by perpetrators. So that's why there's a difference between domestic abuse incidents and crimes that are recorded by police. And there's a number of related offences. So things which, this isn't limited to this, but harassment, stalking, physical assault, sexual assault, rape and murder, to name a few. So it results in high harm, it results in high volume incidents which are complex, and they can leave victims with physical and emotional scars that can last a lifetime. And I said it before, devastating impact on children and young people. So there's a role for a multidisciplinary, multi-partner approach on this. Fewer than 1 in 5 victims actually report their abuse to the police. Many victims of domestic abuse don't come into contact actually with the criminal justice system. So it's therefore important that a wide range of bodies actually identify victims and know how to effectively help them. So early identification, both by the voluntary sector and statutory agencies, is key to how we reduce this harm. So I've made it one of my key themes in my police and crime plan. And what I'm intent on is holding the chief accountable for domestic abuse and how it's addressed by Dorset Police. There's also another factor to this. I also chair the Dorset Criminal Justice Board. And so one of the aims of that is joining up the local criminal justice agencies to make certain that their common aims and objectives are about reducing crime, bringing more offenders to justice, increasing public confidence, and to make certain that domestic abuse is a focus for them. So there's many agencies working on this, and I'm going to pick out a couple of things which may be of interest. Something called Operation Encompass is active in Dorset. It's an information sharing protocol between police and schools. It's in place so that the police can alert the school very quickly before the start of the next school day if they are party to a domestic abuse incident. Now, it's firmly acknowledged that schools may only be able to support these children, and there will be other people who need to support these children as well. But that's one way that we can start having a wraparound early for these young people who are affected. And one of the things that I'm very clear about is that needs to be extended. So it does secondary schools and primary schools. We need to extend further down the age range. And I know there is work going on with that, and we hope that actually, is it in or is it coming? The extension to preschool years. It's supposed to be in. It's supposed to be in, right? I believe it is in for preschool years, and we just need to make certain that works as well as possible. The victim is at the heart of this, and I've been and spoken to, for example, U-Trust about what they're doing with victims. I've been to the Bournemouth Churches and Housing Association and also talked to them in one of their refuges about the issues that they face and what they're doing. Maple is co-commissioned by Dorset Police and Dorset OPCC. This provides support to high-risk domestic abuse victims. And its principles are the safety of victims, ensure they're treated with respect, make certain they are given the support provision and they feel empowered and confident throughout the process. That's for high-risk domestic abuse victims. U-Trust and BCHA are for medium risk, and then below that, for, if you like, standard risk DA, we have Victim Support Dorset, which is provided to eligible victims irrespective of whether they report the crime to the police or not, if they come to the attention of Victim Support Dorset. So that provides tailored emotional and practical support as well. Now, we've got effective referral pathways in place for each of those. In 2019, the structure of Dorset's local authorities changed. Both commission DA support provision and safe accommodation. There is some divergence between the way that they do it and in how what's called the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference is arranged. I'm not going to go through that because that's in the paper and very clearly. So now we come to the domestic abuse advisors. They do the same work as what is commonly referred to as independent domestic violence advisors, and they're part of the MAPLE team. So MAPLE is accessible to any high-risk victim of DA, and these domestic abuse advisors provide the support for those victims. It's free to any victim across Dorset. All police high-risk cases are referred for this high-contact risk support. The vision of MAPLE is that whoever it is, whether it's a woman, man or children, if they are affected by domestic abuse, there's a high level of support and protection. And that the perpetrators are held accountable for their behaviour. So this very much is victim-focused support rather than investigation-focused, which is done by the force. And that basically will be looking at the perpetrator. So this is the voice of the victim. Each victim will be worked with by this domestic advisor to come to develop a safety plan. Now that's done as early as possible. You can imagine that the situation might be that something needs to happen very quickly. So that occurs over the telephone during initial contact. And it's the domestic abuse advisor's role to actually empower the victim to help them carry out those actions. So this will have safety plans. Those will live and develop as necessary, but they will also encompass any children, for example, as they develop. You've seen the current domestic abuse performance. From the point of view of crimes, we're actually, from the point of view for 2021-22, we're roughly the same as 2020-2021. Not all incidents, however, result in a recordable crime. But they do place a high demand on policing, as the chart shows. So actually, the number of incidences have increased. This is not surprising. I think it was pretty much projected when we were in COVID, and it was suggested that it may increase, and that certainly happened. There's a complex range of factors, though. I mentioned COVID. People may indeed be experiencing disruption of social and protective networks. We've got the situation with the cost of living crisis. People may not be going out so much because of financial pressures, so they're not accessing their support networks in the way that they used to. We know that COVID-19 had an impact on mental health. That will be unraveling. There is greater awareness of domestic abuse. We know that. There's greater awareness of what support is available. There's also greater publicity around violence against women and girls, and those things may encourage reporting. What I'm clear about is whatever reason, we need to make certain that we have the support in place. We also need to make certain that we have the training in place for the police and the frontline staff. Now, all of the frontline staff, including the force control room staff, have received domestic abuse matters training. Basically, this was developed with a charity, Safe Lives, and the College of Policing. It's a cultural change program, bespoke for police officers. So it's been designed to transform the response to DA with the victim at the center of it. The idea is it has a long-term impact because it's challenging the attitudes, culture, and behavior of the police when responding to domestic abuse. What this will mean is that they will be better at spotting it, they will be better at dealing with it, they will be better at ensuring the victims get support. So that's very much background, which I thought it was useful to go through. From the point of view of progress, firstly, the point I just made, this sits very clearly within my priority 3, fight violence and high crime and high harm. Domestic abuse matters has been rolled out across Dorset Police. That is extremely good. And that will have been all of Dorset Police, it would have been all areas. And I'm particularly keen on that because if I talk to the rural area for a moment, we know that domestic abuse there, it is longer for people to seek help. It is also longer for people to get the support. So wherever they are in Dorset now, the police officers have been trained in order to understand domestic abuse in a way that they didn't before. The Bobby van, which we have, that system now attends some addresses of median risk DA victims in the BCP area to provide further support. I actually put in place, when I first came into office, £80,000. This funds a U-Trust independent stalking advocacy caseworker. Stalking is a horrible crime. It used to be that it was actually somebody followed you, somebody pestered you. Now they can do it online as well. And I'm very clear that victims need to be protected. We have forced vulnerability lawyers within Dorset Police. Their responsibility is to increase the use of stalking protection orders. And that's something that I talk to the police about on a regular basis in order to make certain that those are increasing. They're small at the moment. There is another thing called a domestic abuse prevention notice, which actually we use, Dorset Police uses extensively. So one is very large, the other at this moment is small but growing. I want to make certain that the stalking one is used in absolutely the right way and is used where necessary. So that's an ongoing dialogue I have with Dorset Police in order to make certain that's happening. There's a domestic abuse Triforce action plan. So this is with the CPS. So this is Wiltshire, Hampshire and Dorset combining. It takes the learning from national and regional reviews and embeds best practice into the community justice system. So it links in with the government's Violence Against Women and Girls strategy as well as the domestic abuse strategy. Dorset Police at the moment are actually looking at a joint communication strategy with the CPS across all three areas in order to communicate and encourage victims of domestic abuse, coercive and controlling behaviour and stalking to report those crimes. We've received £200,000, £185 funding to tackle domestic abuse in the county. We successfully bid with the local authorities. This funding is being used for projects to identify perpetrators and implement strategies to address their behaviour. And 240 frontline professionals across the country to receive specialist training in the family practice model to address domestic abuse. The idea is that we're going to try and reduce the incidence of domestic abuse, prevent the cycle of abuse, and reduce the number of children who require care. That's currently running in Bournemouth, Poole and Weymouth. The additional funding will allow it to expand to Christchurch as well. I've mentioned it before, the DRIVE programme, which is working with perpetrators in order to change their behaviour. That's in place, the pilot was in place, and a bid has been put forward to extend that for another year. We continue to support CARA, which is the Conditional Caution and Relationship Abuse. It's a domestic abuse diversion. It's been shown to actually work. It's mandatory for all male offenders who have committed an intimate DA offence. Something else I mentioned and alluded to earlier was the Criminal Justice Board. I requested that there was an analysis of the rates of victim attrition throughout the criminal justice process. That is actually for rape and sexual assault. And the reason that I'm bringing it in here is because those are, in some cases, intimately connected with domestic abuse. We've also got funding available for Smart Water Deterrent for domestic abuse victims. These are home protection packs which enable the victim to forensically mark items in their home as well as the external environment. So that deters offenders who may want to go back, break a restraining order. There's trace evidence that they would be there. 200 packs will be purchased and they're going to be deployed in a 12 months trial. And finally, and I'll pay homage to Molly Rennie, who used to be a member of this panel, and the Domestic Abuse Forum. We're a member of that. We meet quarterly, and I'm very clear that that does incredibly good work, and I'm very happy to support it. So that's an overview of what's going on. We also have the scrutiny of Maple, the high-risk Dorset DAA provision. That continues to be an effective service. In 2020, we had the charity Safe Lives carry out an independent review. Several recommendations were made. Immediate steps were taken with some of them. Others require significant changes to the operating model. And consideration as to whether Maple should be independent and hosted by a third sector service rather than the police. I've now picked that up, and we are having regular meetings with Maple in order to discuss the larger changes which may or may not need to happen. So it's currently under review regarding its feasibility of increasing the independence of the service going forward, which will be better from the independence point of view. We want to make certain that if we do that, then we maintain the high levels of engagement and service currently being delivered. So we're looking at this, and we want to make certain that this service, however it's delivered, is efficient and provides value for money. It's too important, it's too complex a process for us to make a mistake with this. So the Maple Review Project aims to enhance the level of service provided to DA survivors while providing a value for money service. It assesses the quality of service provision of independent third-party sector organisations, and then will assess the costs and whether it makes sense to transfer to a third-party provider. So that's where we are at the moment with Maple. We're having a review of it because of those recommendations. And as I say, we've got regular meetings. Next steps and challenges. The next stage of Operation Encompass, I basically checked that. We've actually broadened the support it's going to go to early learning placements. That's beginning to happen now. We're looking at working with partners to develop a whole systems approach to domestic abuse. So this basically means that we'll link in with our local authorities and other partners and look at co-commissioning opportunities across the Pan Dorset area. But look, let's not fool ourselves. We've got a cost of living crisis happening now, which we didn't have before, and that will further increase the DA reporting as financial pressures mount within the households. So that a lot of the work is happening, a lot of things are in place. We need to keep doing it. We need to keep moving forward. We need to be aware that the cost of living crisis may put even more pressure on the delivery for victims and make certain that we address that. How does it work? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. May.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for what is actually a very, very comprehensive report. But I'd also, Chair, like to make a note of thanks to Mark Eyre and to Adam Harrell for their guidance in pulling this paper together. So I have a few questions. Quite a number of the questions that I would have asked have already been addressed either within your presentation, Commissioner, or within the report itself. So that actually helps to speed things along a little. The thing that it is actually in your report under point 6.3, which is at the end, but which was to do with the cost of living. Clearly, that's already on your radar to see whether any additional training has been given to the DAA so that they would know to be able to spot the early signs of any potential domestic abuse that may sadly result from that within the family. The other question I have is obviously with the approach of the DAAs, and I'm asking this question because it happens within adult social care and to a certain extent within children's services, and that is consistency of approach. One person may, because it's not an exact science, the assessment and the way they actually view a situation is very subjective. And I think sometimes with something as complex as domestic abuse, is there anything that approaches some kind of consistency in the approach they take when they deal with particularly the victims? Because as you quite rightly say, the victim is the focus. They are at the heart of what we do. And also welcome the fact that you have the whole family approach. I'm rattling through the questions because I have to go at about 1:30. And then the other question I have, the thing that did stick out for me, was the bar chart in 3.1. There appears to be a bit of a pattern there, and sadly it is actually rising with each 12-month period, but there appears to be a higher demand between April and about June. For some reason, it's kind of there. It seems to rise and then fall again. And I'm just wondering whether any work has actually been done to actually look into why, so that it would actually then inform better how the work and the advice and the support can actually be provided. No, we're not talking about preventative measures here, but it just did strike me to say, okay, maybe there's something in there. What else have I got? Oh, yes, and then the last question I have is, what sort of a turnover do you have with the DAAs? When they are recruited, do they stay for quite a reasonably length of time? Or do they leave? And this then kind of links in with my previous question, which was to do with consistency of approach. Because when you change advisors, they may take a slightly different approach. And then the victim kind of feels that, well, they're not being given the support because the approach is actually different from the previous advisor they had. Those are all the questions I have, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, if I address you mentioned about the issue of the cost of living crisis and all the rest of it. The point I'd make is that as part of the training that they get, the issue of financial coercion and the effect of money on the domestic abuse landscape is something which they are very much aware of. So it would have been part of a number of things that they will talk about, but they will be heightening it because of be more heightened aware of it because of the cost of living crisis. But it's very much on that domestic abuse matters training anyway, because it's a key part of how somebody controls somebody is through the finances and the stress that it gives. The next question was about consistency, wasn't it? That is primarily dealt with through the different MARIC processes to make certain that there is consistent approaches from that point of view, and obviously the MAPLE is feeds in with that in order to make that point. Having said that, I will ask, as part of the review process, that we double check and ask that question about training and consistency, because it is one of my little bugbears, is to make certain that things that happen in one place happen in another place exactly the same. So if guys, we can just take an action to ask that question in the review. So thank you for that. The question about April, June. Yeah, I mean, lockdown is everybody behind me is saying lockdown, which I think is probably absolutely part of it. And for both of those, it looks like it very much could be lockdown is the answer. I do know that there is a close relationship between domestic abuse and football, and also that's coming to the end of the season. I don't know if that causes additional stresses, but certainly I would go with lockdown as the reason for that, as the big reason for that, looking at this. I think that's it, wasn't it? Churn. Again, I don't know the answer to that. Do we have any detail on that? No, we'll find out. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. And I guess just one last question, which I was going to ask was, again, it's a very complex issue, but what do you see as a measure of success that the domestic advisors have actually been effective in their role and therefore the victim has received the support they need so that they can then move on from the very unfortunate incident that they've had been put through?
I think the way that we would assess that outcome is to, first of all, have a survey amongst victims of the service that they're being delivered. That will give us a baseline and how that improves going forward. That's the way I'd measure that.
I'll just add, so as part of the Maple review, that's absolutely one of the things we're looking at. So I think Force would recognise it's data in some of those areas. So victim satisfaction, for example, just isn't as sophisticated as it would like to be. And some of the other reporting measures, and if you were to look online at some of other services, they're able to talk far more about the number of contacts they have, the speed at which they do so. And for a variety of reasons, as part of the Maple review, that data isn't as available in Dorset as it might be. So part of this review is, so obviously, can we have a better service? But when we look at those improvements, we need that data so that we can track it more effectively. So one of those things is about that survey, as the Commissioner just mentioned, because it has been done in Dorset, but the analysis of it just isn't as sophisticated as we'd like, and also the way it's being done isn't as independent as we'd like, because you actually, as it happens in Dorset, you've got the domestic abuse advisors asking their own clients, well, what did you think of the service? And it's been recognised that you really should change that, but it's absolutely part of that review process.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Mayor. Thanks once again for the hard work that you've put into this as well. So it's appreciated by all of us. Les, then Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Really good report, very detailed, and I appreciate and value what's going on. One area that perhaps hasn't been covered in this report is every year a number of domestic abuse perpetrators and victims churned out from the schools to come into society. What are we doing with education establishments to try and highlight the issues to the young people of the risks of becoming either a victim or an offender?
That's a very good question, and that is something which I'm using lobbying power to try and address, because it's part of a wider issue. I mean, young people, we have some great young people in Dorset. You know, I could talk to about the cadets, I could talk to about lots of young people I know who are absolutely brilliant. Nevertheless, we know that some of them come out with behaviours and attitudes which are not helpful to the rest of society. So we have misogyny, we have hate crime, we have the use of drugs, we have all these things which, to my mind, are not being addressed well enough, as I said before, nationally, or indeed we can do better locally. But it does need some national focus on this. From the point of view of actual programs, I'm not aware of one. Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry. From the point of view of what the police will do, is they have a Safer Schools program, and that Safer Schools team will work with the 50 schools in the most deprived areas of Dorset, and they will have a regular contact, and they will talk about these sorts of things. Elsewhere, it is the neighbourhood policing team who will have contact with the local schools in order to, again, touch in on these areas. From the point of view of, is there a national citizenship scheme as part of the national curriculum? I'd like to see much more done in that regard, particularly earlier with our primary schools. And that's what I'm trying to get attention for going forward, because I think that national sort of idea would help Fundamentally, I think we've got to have better wraparound from all services at all stages. And that includes, the very early years before school, and it includes very close partnership working between local authorities and other agencies, such as health, such as police. Those families, those kids who may be vulnerable, may be in trouble, they may be the very ones who we're talking about, and it needs much closer partnership around that. So I've kind of given you a snapshot of my opinion around it. I hope that helps, Les.
It does, thank you. And I'm certainly aware of the Safer Schools doing some excellent work there. I know they've talked about drugs and alcohol and substances like that. I'm not aware that they've been talking about domestic abuse at all. And I don't know whether if that's on their curriculum and agenda, because that's at that early stage when some of those mischievous habits, those unhelpful habits are built into young people, possibly.
Yeah. So I think actually that there is something there. I'm going to hand over to Adam to give you his take on it. I think there's a balance to be had as well, which is talking to a whole class about domestic abuse. Actually, what we should be talking about is we should be talking about the things which is going to drive that domestic abuse in the future. So things like misogyny, etc. Adam, do you want to?
Yeah, just briefly, there is the Safer Schools team does have a young people and safe relationships module and program which does cover domestic abuse and other types of relationships. There's, for those interested, you can find it on the Force website, and it outlines a number of different key stage themes and programs, some aimed at the children, some aimed at professionals. There's quite a lot available. This part of the website is aimed at professionals, but it's available to see, and there's quite an amount there. But as the Commissioner says, it is a balance, and also the way it's taught is more about the relationships, I think, more broadly, rather than specifically domestic abuse, particularly at the younger years.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I was going, looking at the positive behaviours of society and life rather than the negatives, because we want to treat our children positively. They are an asset, and we want to give them the right behaviours to go forward. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, there's very few papers I look at and I think, yes, result, this is really good, so thank you. I especially welcome the prevention and intervention work. You mentioned Operation Encompass, fantastic. We know that supporting these young people that have witnessed domestic abuse is and supporting them is one way of actually reducing further them becoming part of the chain and part of the cycle. And again, and on that ilk, again, the work of Up to You and breaking the chain and stopping that perpetrator from going across from family to family or from relationship to relationship and causing absolute carnage. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, where can I pick it apart? What can I add in? And I think that actually where my concerns are around taking what Councillor May Haynes mentions around consistency. And for me, it's about what assurance can you give of parity of access to domestic abuse services and perpetrator programmes across Dorset. And I might have a follow-on on this one. I left it purposely open.
Thank you. Well, that's part of the review of Maple, is in order to make certain that that's one of the things we need to check from the point of view of service efficiency. I am very pleased that this review is now happening. It's been in the long grass for a couple of years, and it's allowing us to unpick and actually find out exactly what we need. From the point of view of going forward, I am not wedded to going independent unless I can see that the same service delivery we've got now, or better still, an improved service delivery can be delivered, and we'll see where we are. And it's exactly that. It's parity across Dorset, which will be one of the functions in the review. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, and I welcome that. And again, just picking at hairs, splitting hairs. Sorry, It's just looking at the majority of the funding from my point of view, from what I can see in the papers, is based around, and I'm not digging at my BCP colleagues because it's actually around the South Dorset area, especially with things like the Bobby Bus and things like the Up to You programme is based in Weymouth and Poole and Bournemouth and Christchurch. And I think, from putting my former head on, I think, well, do you know what? In the countryside, nobody can hear you scream, and it does go on in the northern areas. And I think, and you mentioned previously how access to actually getting help is far more difficult in those areas. So I'd welcome that. Thank you. Sorry, I know that was quite getting my member hat on.
No, but listen, you're absolutely right, and I am keen that we have this provision across Dorset. And you heard me say earlier about the rural areas. I'm very aware of that particular situation in relation to domestic abuse. In fact, when I talk about rural crime, I normally mention domestic abuse and pick it out separately because of that differential in rural areas. We need to make certain that we can service that. So thank you. It's a good point.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Commissioner, for answering all those questions. One question for me, really. I mean, how does this work dovetail into providing signposts for other crime?
I'm sorry, technology. It's useful to reiterate that domestic abuse is not a specific criminal offence. So naturally, officers and staff who are, when faced with domestic abuse incidents, they're also seeking to identify those criminal offences that may have been committed by the perpetrators. So the offences could be controlling or coercive behaviour, it could be harassment and stalking, it could be criminal damage, physical assault, rape and sexual assault, modern slavery, drug supply, burglary. So it could be any of those as factors involved with this. So what the investigators do is they gather all the evidence relating to the initial incident reported. But during discussions with the victim, the identification and evidence gathering of any other crimes that may have been committed will also be recorded and assessed for prosecution viability. As the crimes are identified, so also will the support needs of the victim be changed accordingly. So, for example, you may have somebody who reports controlling or coercive behaviour, and in the conversation they tell you about a historic sexual assault or rape, and the victim's support would change accordingly to do that. When victims of domestic abuse first come into contact with the police, there's a risk assessment done, and that's a continuously changing document, changes with time. It identifies information provision and also safeguarding requirements. So there's often other needs such as mental health, social care, housing support. This information is gathered throughout the time that the police, the domestic abuse advisors and support providers engage with the victim. Referrals are made to specialist support providers, agencies, and when that's identified. And for the very high-risk cases, referrals can be taken through the MARIC process and done through the partnership approach. In terms of a couple of specific processes where domestic abuse may cross over with other crimes, I can provide some extra information that may assist the panel's understanding. So first, in terms of burglary, you'll be familiar with the Bobby van. I mentioned it earlier. The aim of the Bobby van is to reduce the level of residential burglary and distraction burglary and to enable people to maintain a sense of security within their own home. So it was initially focused on vulnerable victims of burglary, but it's been expanded a little bit to medium risk of domestic abuse in the BCP area because there's also good processes in place amongst all agencies to safeguard those graded at high risk and standard risk can receive target hardening. In this specific example, the police can also ensure that a DA victim can include signposting to a related but separate service. So the Bobby van does its bit for the medium risk domestic abuse and links in, particularly where there are fears from those medium risk people about the fact that the perpetrator will be trying to break into their home or whatever. It makes complete sense for that to work. It's also, of course, possible that there may be a link between a reported DA incident and modern slavery. So modern slavery is a complex crime. There's multiple forms of exploitation. Victims may not be aware they're being trafficked or exploited, and they could have consented to certain elements of their exploitation. So if this has been identified, the case will be referred to the National Referral Mechanism. The NRM is a framework for identifying and referring potential victims of modern slavery and ensuring they receive the appropriate support so that the relevant authority can actually consider their case. So domestic abuse abuts on a huge number of areas. Another one that I'll mention, which wasn't mentioned on the list earlier, is harmful gambling, for example. Again, there is a close correlation between that and domestic abuse. So it's very difficult to answer comprehensively going through absolutely everything, but I hope this provides reassurance, first of all, that the police actually take other factors, other crimes into account when they see victims, and also that the various processes and procedures dovetail nicely together.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any further questions they'd like to ask? What I'm proposing to do, unless anybody wants to get in the ditch, is push the road safety paper back to the next meeting, primarily because the councillor who is leading on that unfortunately couldn't make it today because he's on the fire authority meeting. And secondly, I'm conscious of time as well. So does anybody have any violent objection to pushing that paper back to the next meeting? No? Good. Okay, thank you. Then in that case, then I'll move swiftly on to Ian and complaints update.
I'll be as quick as I can. In this last reporting period, there's been one recorded complaint made against the PCC. That was dealt with correctly under the legislation and met the policy procedure and was resolved under the informal resolution process by the CEO as per the legislation. So as far as we're concerned now, that matter is concluded. There's a little bit of an action for Mark that needs to be recorded in the minutes, which is he will arrange for the annual meeting of the subcommittee, which we'll most probably do either after the November training day or the December meeting, because it shouldn't take too long to review the policy and procedures to make sure it's still legal and obviously necessary and proportionate, effective, efficient and transparent. A lot of management words in there, but there you go. And then we've got one outstanding action, which is the subcommittee requires a new member. We have got a volunteer who is Councillor Johnson, and I haven't nominated him because he's now gone. He does know about this. So I would ask, as a proposer, I would propose him as our fourth member on that subcommittee to make sure that we're up to our numbers. So I'd want to second it if people are happy with that. There you go. So, and there's a small action, maybe not necessarily in here, Mark, but if you can send a copy of the legislation, policy and procedure as we normally do to Toby so that he's ready for the meeting. And that's us done.
Thanks very much, Ian. Mark, forward work plan. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Not really anything to raise on the work plan. It's there in the papers for everyone to see. So I think it sets out a number of items moving forward for the next few years.
Thank you very much for that. On the next training day, we will cover the forward work plan. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I'd just like to see on now it's on the forward plan the road safety paper. It doesn't split out or discuss any differences in relation to vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, and I think that that's something of something that shouldn't be missing from that paper. Is it possible for that paper to be expanded so that we have, the performance in terms of performance, wrong words, statistics, etc. of cycling, walking casualties can be included?
I don't think the paper should be extended. There may be, to answer your question, an addendum placed upon the paper. My question to you is, what are you going to do with this information?
doesn't at all discuss, cycling and pedestrian casualties, and they're very important, to local authorities in particular because our policies are focused on promoting walking and cycling above use of vehicles. So we need that kind of information in order to be able to, properly assess the police's performance in this area.
So from the point of view of the paper, it was put together according to the key lines of inquiry which we received. If this could be framed as another key line of inquiry, then we'll be very happy to have a look at it and address it.
Mark, if you could submit a key line of inquiry to Mark 2 here, and then we will then forward that on to the Commissioner's office, and they'll provide you with the data that you and Sherry need. Happy? Cool.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Useful contribution, Mark. Thank you. Urgent items? Exempt business? Then in that case then, unless anybody's got anything else they'd like to say, no? Commissioner?
I need to say thank you to the panel for their questions and their scrutiny, and a thank you for my team for the preparation in order for us to answer your questions. So thank you, Chair.
In that case then, unless anybody, quick look around the room, anybody on the screens? No. In that case then, finally, thank you to you, Commissioner, and your team for producing all the work that you have done today. So thank you very much, and I'll close this meeting. Thank you. Bye.